story about a fish that lives in a lake up in the mountains. And one day that fish decides to leave and get into the stream that leaves the lake. And he goes down into the stream, and that stream eventually becomes a small river, and that river empties into a bigger river. And eventually he makes it all the way out to the ocean. And he's had all this change. He gets out to the ocean and he can't really survive too well in the salt water. So he swims back up the river, up the smaller river, up the stream. And just outside the lake, he's in the stream, and another fish comes out that he knew. And he says, "How's the water?" And the friendly fish says, "What's water?" And so you don't understand your box until you actually leave it. And so the story of my life is leaving boxes. So now I'm 70 years old and I'm in my 10th career. And I've had a very unusual life. So I would start by talking about my parents, because we are all creatures of our genetics and our upbringing and the things that we inherited, the biochemistry of our parents. And so my dad was an all-American athlete, a Dutch, frugal Dutch guy from a poor family. And so he was frugal, but he was also a good athlete, and he was also a genius. So I inherited from him a number of things, and of course I acquired some of those things too, because we were poor and we were frugal. I ended up becoming frugal. He was an out-of-the-box thinker. He actually worked in Christian ministry for almost his entire life. And he died at 93, but he was still doing Bible studies in the nursing home when he was 90. And so he was a workaholic. He was a basketball player at Seattle Pacific University, set all kinds of records, but he was short. He was 6'1", but he played center. And so he always had to think about, how am I going to excel in this sport, being like the shortest guy on the team?
Yeah, normal life, 6'1" tall, and basketball is short. Yeah,
exactly. And I mean, he played against Wilt Chamberlain, who was 7 foot tall. And so he had to be very creative. And sometimes it was, in ways that he could foul somebody without being caught. Like stepping on a guy's foot when going up for the rebound, so the other guy couldn't jump, and then he would get. So it would be little things like that. So he was a little bit sneaky, but very smart. But when he decided to go into the ministry, into Young Life, which is a child or a youth evangelistic organization, he moved from Seattle to Philadelphia. My mom was a short Cuban, and my dad was ostracized by his family because he married outside the Dutch heritage. So again, he's thinking outside the box. My mom's not the normal Dutch tall person. She's just short Cuban. And so the two of them met in college, and Dad decides he's going to join Young Life. And so he takes his wife, my mom, Patty, and they moved to Philadelphia. Before they moved, they had a daughter, my sister. So when we got to Philadelphia, that's where I was born. And in Young Life, the people who were doing the work had to raise their own support. So he was constantly trying to do his work, but also letting people know of the vision of Young Life, which is to share the gospel with kids in high school. And he became very good at it. But because he had to raise his own support, we usually didn't have much money. So we grew up poor, but my dad was convinced that this is what God wanted him to do. So even though he had the brains that could have taken him really far in business and made a lot of money. That was not the vocation he wanted to pursue.
So you were born in 1954?
53.
53.
So day after Christmas. And it was a suburb of Philadelphia, Chester. It's now a very poor Black community. Back then, it was the main business was making toilet paper. The hospital was based there, and so that's where I was born. Eventually, my dad did really well in Philadelphia, that he got promoted, and we moved to Baltimore. And there I had 2 other brothers born. And my dad tells the story about how on Christmas Eve one year, they had no food in the house. And so they just prayed that, God would provide. And Christmas morning, they woke up, and on the front porch was a bunch of food. So he was the kind of person that thought, I'm going to do the right thing and let God take care of the details. So his life is full of those kind of experiences. And his memoirs I'm going to publish fairly soon, and it's an extraordinary story.
Nice.
And he ends up in Bangladesh after leaving young life. But anyway, so we were in Baltimore, and then he got another promotion. So we went outside of DC. So I'm, Philadelphia, Baltimore, DC, and that's where I started kindergarten. And when I think about my life, I reflect on why am I the way I am? And one of the things is that my parents didn't really know what they were doing with raising kids. And now there's 4 kids, and they're all young. And I actually never crawled. There was a playpen. I was put in a playpen, and I walked around the edges. And so I was walking by the time I was 9 months old. And probably that's why I'm bow-legged too, because my leg structure was shaped in those early years. And my wife says,
A thought just occurred to me about parenting. And most things in life, if you want to learn how to drive, you have to go take a license, take a test. You want to learn how to fly, take a test. But parenting, there's no test.
No.
And it's like, you probably should have some kind of I'm saying it facetiously, but it's like, that is, of all the things that we test, that's probably one thing. It's like, are you qualified to be a parent? Do you have the knowledge to be a good parent? And unfortunately, we don't. And this is why we end up with some of the products that we have.
So when we moved to the DC area, Silver Spring, because I was born the day after Christmas, the deadline for going to school was January 1st. So in a lot of places, it's like September 1st. So I end up being the youngest kid in school. So I actually go to kindergarten when I'm 4. And I think probably my parents were thinking, let's have Pete go to school because I got my hands full with 2 other kids. And so let the education system take, the daughter and the son, and now there's only 2 at home.
Were you in a public or private school?
It was all of the schools I went to up until college were public school. But my parents, because they were busy and had lots of other kids, they kind of neglected me. And it actually worked to my advantage because I could do anything I wanted. So I would be climbing trees. I was like a monkey. And so I was, 5, 6, 7 years old, and I was climbing trees that were huge. And I don't think my mom or dad knew. My dad was usually off working, and my mom was taking care of the house and with 2 younger kids. So I don't even think she knew that I was climbing the trees, or I was so skinny that I could fit down between into the sewers on the curb. So I and another guy, we wandered around in the sewers, for blocks and blocks and blocks. And she didn't know that until I ended up telling her about it, when I was like, 60 years old. She was horror struck. But the thing is, what I learned was I could pretty much do what I wanted to. And because I had a good moral code, and I think probably I inherited kind of an optimism. My dad was an optimist. He always figured everything would work out because God would protect him. And so I just kind of flourished as a child. There was no trauma in the house. My parents, didn't drink or smoke. They had a very conservative upbringing, so they had a lot of rules about what not to do. But it kind of developed a strong foundation for me as a kid that I'm not worrying about stuff. So eventually we moved, my dad gets another promotion, and we moved from the Bay Area out to the Bay Area in San Francisco, San Jose. And that was in the middle of my second grade. And so now here's another school, public school. He decides he goes to Palo Alto, but he realizes that's not really the best place for his work. So 6 months later, we moved to San Jose, and that's where I attend another school. And I lived there for 5 years, in elementary school, and then junior high. And I was a good athlete. I was on the basketball team. I was a good runner. I was one of the faster guys in the school. I was still climbing trees. And then my dad just gets another promotion. So his promotions in young life was to bigger and bigger territory.
I have a question in regards to sports. When you were a child, did you have dreams of playing professional, or is it more just for the love of the game?
Actually, I had one aspiration. It's the only aspiration I've ever had, and that was to play center field for the San Francisco Giants. And I was quite sure I was going to take Willie Mays' place. I mean, this is that optimistic, kind of naive thinking. And at one point, Willie Mays had $1 million contract, and it made big news. And I told my dad, I'm gonna play center field like Willie, and I'm gonna have $1 million. And my dad looked at me and said, will you give me half of it in your first contract? And I thought to myself, yeah, sure, I will. So I was pretty confident it was a done deal and it was going to happen. In fact, I had these tennis shoes, these Converse All-Stars, that I put on the toe, I put the great on them because I thought it was great. And then a little bit later, I thought, I wonder if that's being too proud or arrogant or bragging. And so I asked my mom, do you think I should have this? Do you think people think I'm going to be bragging? And she said, yeah, that some people might think that. And so I erased it. So one, I'm kind of aware of my surroundings and how I'm coming across, but there is a sense of humility and not wanting to be a braggart.
The reason why I bring up the sports is there's a lot of value and benefits to sports. I let my kids be involved with it. I think that it does help them develop, grow. There's a lot of learning to do the little things, practice. There's a lot of things like that.
Yep.
And I've talked to other, obviously I have 3 boys and a daughter, and my boys are heavily into sports. They love basketball. And so one guy I talked to was like, don't discourage them from dreaming big, because reality will set in and will hit them in the face, and that should work enough. And so I'm kind of taking that approach where it's like, if that's what motivates you on a summer to go work out and to dribble and to go run, great, because one day you'll wake up and you'll realize, side story, I met the guy, I was in the sauna, and I'd never seen him before in the sauna. Struck up a conversation. He happens to be the dad of the number one basketball player in the state of Washington this year. Like, what are the odds of me running into that guy? So we had a great conversation. And so I went home and did some more research on the guy, but it's like, if the guy's like 6'9", and so like if that same guy was 6'1", I don't think he'd be in that position. So with my kids, it's like, you can be really good, and I still want you to train in those things, but if you're not close to 6'6", 6'7", 6'8", 6'9", 6'10", then it doesn't ultimately matter. But that doesn't mean I'm going to not encourage them to play, because there's so many other benefits to it. The downside of sports is when it becomes all consuming.
For sure.
And so like, we're watching Olympics right now because it's going on. Not the ceremony, that was, but then my son was like, oh, I'm gonna watch college basketball, and I want to watch this, and I want to watch that. I was like, no, we're not gonna waste our time watching all these different sports. So I have to, as a father, find that balance of like, yes, I have you play sports. Like yesterday, we went outside and we played for an hour because it's good, right? But I'm not going to encourage behavior where we sit all day just watching sports.
Right. So one of the advantages of living in California is that you could be outside all the time.
Right.
And so I was playing mostly baseball and basketball. And I played some football too, but it was flag at that point.
Does life just set in at some point when you turn that knob down and find other pursuits? Does that just naturally happen? I don't think I'll have to do that for them, but like, realize that at some point in your life, you're not going to dedicate as much time and energy into a sport because it's just...
Well, I'll tell you my story.
Yeah.
And as I reflect on this little guy who ends up doing pretty amazing things.
How about you or Willie?
Me.
Okay.
So I started playing Little League at age 8. They had a pitching machine, and I was pretty good. And then we moved up to the minors, a 9-year-old, and I was pretty decent there. I remember being a pitcher, and I could get the ball over. And so people liked having me be the pitcher because I didn't walk guys. But that meant the guys were hitting the ball all over the place. And so I would lose 25 to 10. But it's like, I wasn't thinking that I was a loser. I was just having fun. And I especially liked having snacks after the game. So I wasn't really into winning that much.
It's interesting.
And then at age 10, I went up to, the big leagues, the majors, and I bombed badly because I didn't have the right mechanics for fielding and for hitting. And eventually my coach taught me how to hit. The ball was coming in way faster than I had been used to. And I remember it struck out like every time I got up. And halfway through the season, they had me learn how to actually swing. And it's like I was so excited when I hit the ball, even though it was a ground out, I had hit the ball. So that was a highlight. Eventually, we moved from Northern California to Southern California. In the meantime, I'm learning how to play the piano. So my great-grandmother was a concert pianist on my mom's side. And she gave us this grand piano. So I'm learning the piano. So with all these sports, I'm learning, my hands are getting flexible. I'm learning how to defend in basketball and with quick movements. In baseball, I'm learning how to track a ball from very far away in order to catch a fly ball in the outfield. I was the all-star quarterback, shortstop in Southern California. we moved from the Bay Area down to LA. My dad got a promotion, so now he's in charge of all of Southern California in Young Life. They decide to put me from 7th grade back to 6th grade in the middle of the year because I'm always the youngest kid in the school.
Mm-hmm.
So during the move, I go from 7th grade to 6th grade in another town, and nobody knows other than the teacher that I've already covered all the material. In the meantime, I'm now the all-star shortstop in the Little League in Southern California, and we have a really good team. So I'm thinking baseball is it. It's not basketball because I'm probably too short, but baseball's the thing. And eventually, we moved another place to Orange County. So now I'm in regular middle school, junior high, and in high school. And I'm playing football, flag football. I'm playing a starting guard on the basketball team. I'm playing soccer. I'm playing track. And I'm in the Little League.
Is your mom taking you to all these games and practices?
No, I'm riding myself on a bike, and I'm getting rides from other people. My dad was pretty much non-existent because he was doing other things after school with Young Life, where he's doing what they called contact work, going to the high schools where he's meeting kids. Mom's holding down the fort, and I'm riding, 5 miles away on my bike through the streets of San Jose.
So I'm curious, you said that lifestyle worked for you. Were your siblings okay with dad being not as involved?
I would say that my 2 younger brothers had each other. So they played with each other and they had some of their own friends.
Mm.
I was 2 years ahead, but I was just in a different space. And so I was doing all these activities.
Because some kids, that story, the kid grows up and be like, my parents were never there.
Right.
And that ends up being detrimental.
Right.
But
I never sensed that I wasn't loved.
Yeah.
And there wasn't trauma. It's not like it was almost benign neglect. And it worked for me.
Yeah.
I think my sister suffered. She was older and she was the one girl. And back then, the role model was the mom who stayed at home. So I think she struggled with the moves. I think she struggled with finding a place for herself. My 2 younger brothers, they had each other, and I was off doing my own thing, kind of oblivious to other people's stuff.
Like when I do podcasts with older men that are older than me, and sports had a big part to do with their growing up, and then when I talk to women, they weren't.
Right.
There was nothing for them. Like one girl, she's like, I rode my bike. It
was cheerleading or pom-pom or
Yeah.
flag twirlers.
But even like elementary, middle school, that's not a thing.
Right.
And so she's like, I just rode my bike.
Yeah.
It's like, I have a daughter, so I'm trying to make sure that the opportunities I give to my sons, she can do that. So like when I go, like we went running on Sunday, I ran, my boys ran, and then she rode the bike. So she's there with us, trying to be involved as much as she can, or we go outside.
I think it's a wonderful thing that girls now have sports that they can play in.
Mm-hmm.
And I love it. Sports is a really good confidence booster. It also teaches you to be disciplined. And one of the things that I think was a common denominator for me in my life was that I wanted to be good. And there was also a sense...
But you didn't care about the win-loss as much, though.
I didn't keep track of that. And
which is interesting, because
I don't know what my batting average was, but it could have been 400. But I didn't... That wasn't the focus of the coaches. I think that was good to not focus on those kind of goals. I think the goal at that point was to have fun, develop your skills, learn how to work as a team, learn how to win, learn how to lose, and not be consumed by winning. In fact, one of the secrets to success in life is failure. There's a book written about that. But the people who don't fail are the ones who really struggle, because eventually we all fail. And the ones who haven't learned how to deal with failure, they fall apart.
Yeah, agreed.
So eventually, so in Southern Cal, I'm playing all these different sports. I'm the starting guard in the basketball team. I'm the starting wide receiver and played a little bit of quarterback on the tackle football team. I was still playing baseball. I tried out for the track team, and they thought because I was fast, I would be good at pole vault. So I tried pole vault, but like the second or third practice, I went up and I didn't have enough forward momentum, and so I fell off the pole into the place where the pole goes, and it's like I think this is it. So, but at that point, we knew we were moving to Chicago, so I wasn't gonna get involved in baseball that year. And so in between my freshman and sophomore year, we moved from Orange County to the Chicago area. And again, my dad being strategic, he would usually try to find a good school district, and he would buy the cheapest house in that school district because we couldn't afford it. We were poor. But he wanted us to be exposed to good schools. Now,
I have another question for you in regards to that.
sure.
Back then, what percentage of people bought versus rented?
I don't know. But we did buy a house.
Like everyone you knew, did they own the house they lived in? Or
I think probably a higher percentage of people were buying houses at that time. I think interest rates were low. The first house we bought in
because all the places
San
you guys
Jose.
lived, you guys bought.
Well, with the first house we bought, we were in apartments. I don't even know about the house outside of DC. I don't know that we owned it. But we did buy a house in San Jose. It was $14,900. And
now it's worth $3 million.
Yeah, probably it's on the outskirts of San Jose, and San Jose is one of the wealthiest.
Yeah, Palo Alto, Apple, all those.
And I remember thinking there was another house just kind of on a busy road, but it had a nice view, and that cost $21,000. It's like, man, that would really be nice to have. Well, that house probably is $3 million now. But when we moved to Southern Cal, the first place we did, we rented, but it was kind of a temporary thing so that my dad could kind of get a lay of the land. And then we moved to Orange County because he felt like that was going to be a better place for him as a leader. And so we bought there. We tend to buy fixers and make it work somehow. And the thing about schools, and eventually I'll tell you about my background in education, but schools can have good and bad teachers, but usually the schools in the better off neighborhoods have better salaries. They can hire better teachers, but also have better facilities and have better coaches. So I benefited from good coaches, and that helped me learn the skills. So when we moved to the Chicago area, my dad was thinking, so where do we go? So we end up in a suburb called Hinsdale, which is an area.
This is what, late 60s?
Yeah, so this was in 69. And Hinsdale is a place where a lot of Fortune 500 executives live. We bought a small house close to the railroad tracks in probably the best school district of the state. And they had facilities that were great. They had coaches that were great. They had some teachers that were good, but the worst teacher I ever had in my life was in that school, just because of the way teaching profession works in
Yeah.
schools. And when I got there, I joined the football team. I joined the basketball team. I was on the baseball team. And when I first arrived, I joined the sophomore team. They had a freshman team, a sophomore team, and then junior varsity, varsity. So I joined the sophomore team, and I was a little guy. And they don't know who I am. They look at my size and they think you're going to be a running back. So they give me number 25. It's like, okay, I've never been a running back before, but whatever. And I could catch the ball. So eventually they put me at an end. And the first game we lose like 55-0, but I was the second string end. And in the late in the fourth quarter, they put me in, and I caught like 3 passes. And so they decided that was the preseason game. The next game, they start me at end. I end up catching 3 touchdown passes and running for, like 200 yards in receiving. And all of a sudden, this new little kid is the new kid on the block. He came from California. So all of a sudden, I had friends on the team, and now I'm popular because I'm doing well in school and on the gridiron. So that year, I pretty much was totally just excelling really well. I mean, I was probably having 2 or 3 touchdowns a game. And the school had been known for running, so the other teams didn't know that we were going to be passing the ball. So anyway, I do really well in football. Basketball, I was the starting guard in California, but by the time the sophomore team comes along, the coaches know who all the good guys are. I make the team, but I'm like third string guard. And we're the champions. We're conference champions. We were conference champions in football. It was just, there was a tradition of excelling. The school itself was a traditional power in all kinds of sports. They were state champions in swimming, 9 years in a row. Gymnastics, multiple years in a row. The basketball teams were winning conference. Were in the top 10 in the state in football. So I'm benefiting from good coaching and a sense that you need to be good. And you got to put in the work to be good. And so you're training really hard, and we're lifting weights, in the off season, and the coaches have good game plans, and we're winning. 6-2 would be a bad year in football. I think we lost maybe 1 game in my sophomore year in the basketball team. But I decided at that point that I wasn't going to continue with basketball because I didn't want to sit on the bench.
Yeah, it's not very fun.
So I continued to play baseball. I lettered in baseball and in football as a junior, and then in senior year. My senior year in football, I actually set a state record. We played the best team. We were playing the number 1 team in the state, Evanston. They had 5,000 kids in their school. We had 2,500. Most of the schools in our conference were at least 3,500 kids. Our arch rival, LaGrange, had 5,000 kids, 2 campuses, freshman and sophomore, and junior and senior was another campus. So we were, in a way, underdogs. We were the smallest group, but we had great facilities and great coaching and a great tradition. So everybody hated us. We were the rich kids. And they would love to beat us. Well, we played this number 1 team in the north side of Chicago. We're in the western suburbs. And we had actually beaten them the previous year. So they were out in Hinsdale. They were out for blood. So that game, they pummeled us. But in the process of them pummeling us, we had to throw the ball. I ended up catching 9 passes for over 300 yards. And I scored all the points, 3 touchdowns. And that area was known for their track and field. It was mainly African American. They had the 100-yard winner the previous year. And I'm catching the ball and I'm outrunning all these guys who are running after me. So it was like stunning that this little white guy is catching the ball and then outrunning all these other guys. I had, during baseball, we had really worked hard on running stairs. And so I had developed really good speed. Ended up running probably about a 4.440. But I didn't know that that was fast. I just knew that that was what I was doing. So that was an amazing experience, and I set the state record that stood for almost 40 years against the team that was number 1. They gave up 2 other touchdowns the whole rest of the year. This was the opening game.
Yeah.
I get 3. One was an interception return, and one was like a fumble recovery. So that was the only one to score touchdowns against this team. End up going on and making the all conference and all city and all state.
Were your brothers as good at sports as you were? Did they have that drive as you did?
No. And of course, as they grew up, the coaches thought, oh, here's another Bilesma, and let's have him play wide receiver. Well, they weren't me. So anyway.
So that takes you to end of senior year.
Right.
You've kind of finished sports. A few questions I have in regards to just sports. As someone of faith, do you think it's okay, healthy that a child puts that much energy and focus into sports, knowing that at some point in their life that's going to be turned down? Or is it good for them because they're learning all these other skills, discipline, hard work, that they can then translate to other things in life? Because I think you and I both can agree that, like, at some point, real life kicks in, and you just can't dedicate that much time and energy into something like that. So as a father with children who are athletic, I want to find that balance as well, as far as like, hey, these are important, but not that important. I guess, how would you help me navigate that with my own kids, as far as how much should I let them put into sports, or just kind of let them guide it themselves based off their interest, knowing that at some point life will just become a reality where will it need to be self-actualization for them to be like, oh, yeah, I don't need to put all that time and energy into it. I don't know what your thoughts on that is.
I don't think that's either or. I think, one, you can be a person of faith and still be an athlete. And I think you follow people's passions, or you encourage their passions, and you support them, and they will change. One of the things that I enjoyed is that I did multiple sports. And so I actually benefited from all of them. And in fact, when I reflect on my life, the fact that I did really, really well in football, and we'll get it into college, and I ended up doing really well in college in football too.
So you played sports in college as well?
Yeah, so I ended up having a full ride to a Division I school for football.
Wow. At your size, that's impressive.
Yeah, so I was 5'10", 160 pounds. But I could run fast, and I had the moves that would get me open, and I could catch the ball. And when I think about the fact that I had played the piano, so I developed a set of limber, soft hands. I had played baseball, so I could catch a spinning, a ball that's coming out, really small ball that's coming really fast from a long way away, and you learn to get to the point where you're under it and catch it. And then in basketball, where you're making moves, quick moves, those are all things that you need if you're going to be a wide receiver. And the ball is coming way slower, and it's a lot bigger, and I could juke. And because I'm small, I have to think about, how do I get open? I'm going to get killed if I'm not smart about it.
You're like Edelman out there.
So, yeah. So, like Tyler Lockett. So I ended up, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but I end up catching 200 passes in competition, whether it's in high school and college.
So a pivotal point in people's life is, I think, is leaving the household, senior year. At that point, what was your thought process? Did you saw what kind of man your father was? Did that inspire you to go do big things like him? Or, I guess, talk me through your thought process when you were graduating high school, what your dreams, desires were.
I had none.
Okay.
Other than to go to college and hopefully not cost my parents anything, because they couldn't afford it. So I ended up going to the Air Force Academy. I got a congressional appointment, and
Why Air Force?
well,
Were you interested in the military?
no. It was, I was recruited by other Division I schools, some Big Ten schools, but they ended up not offering me a scholarship, and Air Force did. And I thought to myself, looking back, these are all the wrong reasons, but one is it's free. It's kind of an exclusive school. It should be a good education. I could have a guaranteed job when I come out. I could retire after 20 years of service, so I could actually retire with a full retirement at age 39. And you get paid a little bit. And so I chose that. I had other offers, but that was the one that was the most interesting, challenging, and lucrative.
Yeah.
So I chose that.
And one thing I like to highlight to listeners is a lot of times young people are paralyzed with the unknown of the future. And my encouragement to them is take a step versus no step.
That is a big lesson learned for me, is to always go with the riskier option. So part of who I am, I had gone to I had gone to 8 schools in 12 years. And I'm moving all the time. East Coast, West Coast, Midwest. So change becomes the only constant for me. I mean, typically I live in a place average 2 or 3 years and then move on. So I got very comfortable with going someplace new. I had no control over it, but I made the best of the situation. And because of my background in sports, I had an instant in.
Right.
My sister didn't. My brothers didn't. So it's really important that kids growing up find a network that's good, where they can have friends. I think there are pros and cons to moving around a lot. One is I don't have any roots anywhere. So that's a negative. I'm not rooted anywhere. But on the other hand, I'm very flexible. And I've lived in 4 other countries in 7 states, and I've been to over 80 countries. So it's just kind of an adventuresome spirit that I have, because I'm not afraid of risk.
Yeah. You know, it's funny that the more I do these podcasts, the more I realize you have in common with people than you think, which is I encourage people, like listeners, go talk to strangers because you'll be surprised how much more in common you have, right? Just the Bangladesh thing, right? What are the odds of running it up? Well, this is interesting. So the Olympics is up. So I don't even know I was looking at population, but I didn't realize Bangladesh is like top 10 when it comes to population in the world. It's this tiny little country that most people never heard of, but yet it's like at the top 10, which is kind of because it's like the size of like a average state in America. Yeah, and it's like
140
why have
million
so many people in such a small area? They got to figure that out. But like I was as you're telling your story, it's like yeah, in high school I was at 3 different schools. I had a lot of those similar experiences. Like my freshman year, I didn't know anyone. I went to private school because I was an athlete. Instantly got into the soccer crowd.
Yep.
And then I did track. So I was always involved with some kind of sport. Sophomore, junior years were really hard for me. I was in Bangladesh, going to a school there that just wasn't for me. I crushed everyone in sports because it just totally different level like that I was used to, and they would go have a track meet and they made a rule you could only do so many events because I crushed it. Like it wasn't even competitive. So we won't get into that. But then my senior year, I went to a missionary school in the Philippines, Faith Academy. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. And so I went there my senior year and I crushed it in sports. Like the new guy, like I actually went there earlier, but I hadn't been there in 3 years. So when I showed up, I was like a new person, played rugby. So I think it started with soccer, and first year made varsity, and then played varsity rugby. And I was a small guy like you. And for me, I already, whether it was subconscious or conscious, I knew like, okay, if I'm not going to be that tall, what can I control? Speed and strength. So that's what I put my effort into. And I, like, for practices at rugby or whatever, they're like, if you can beat Josiah in the first 5 minutes in the run, you don't have to practice anymore. We'll never know. No one ever beat me. So like, those are things I could control. I can't control my height, but I can control how much effort I put into those other things. So had fun with rugby. And then, while I was doing soccer, I also did cross country. I never went to any cross country practices because that was the same time as soccer, but then I would show up to the meets and then got second place every time. So just, yeah, if I wasn't involved in sports, life would have been very different. Probably wouldn't have the same social group. So thankfully my kids enjoy sports, so it's easy for me to interact with them on that end.
They do have your genes.
Yeah. So like, I don't know if I told you, like my 11-year-old is already, like I see, because my wife was also athletic and she reminds me of that. She's like, they didn't just get it from you. I was also athletic.
That's right.
And so my 11-year-old, we just did a 5K. He did a 1936, which is very good for anyone. He beat high school competitive girls. And so my best 5K was 19 minutes. He's already almost there at age 11. And I didn't have a coach. My dad wasn't my coach. You know, I love him, but he wasn't there for me. He wasn't involved in my life. Where for me, I get to now be in a position in my boy's life where it's like, wow, imagine I'm not some world-class trainer, but I understand the concept of sports. I understand the concept of training and athleticism and conditioning. And so if my kids want to be a part of that, I'm going to help them. And I get to go do it with them. Like most dads aren't in shape to actually go do stuff with them. They can go out to the track and yell at them. But most dads aren't actually doing the thing where I'm actually out there doing the thing. Like on every Saturday, they know Saturday's sprint day. So we go to the track and sprint. Sundays are long days. We're going to go do 3 to 5 miles. So my kids know, hey, we get to go participate with dad. And that keeps me young and fit, and
For sure.
makes me like, now my son's like, hey dad, you need to lose some fat. It's like, all right, I'll try, because I wouldn't normally care. I'm at a place right now I'm comfortable, but for him, it's like, if he can see that dad put in the time and effort to to condition it to that manner, then I'm gonna try for him. I don't need it for myself. I was at one point overweight, and I lost that. But now for my son, it's like, all right, I'll see if I can get down to 10 to 12%. Because I want them to, I don't want them to force respect, but earn respect because dad can do that as well, on a physical level. So it's just interesting hearing your story. And, I've had some of those similar experiences being involved in lived in different countries, lived in different states. And for me, it didn't help me become more cultured and understanding of people. And it's just funny. We met, less than 2 weeks ago, and you meet someone and you realize if you actually sit down to get to know them, you have a lot more in common than you think you would. So let's go back to high school. You were the kid that didn't quite know you didn't know what you wanted to do.
And when I was picking a college, I wasn't given any guidance.
So your parents were kind of putting it on you.
I think they were clueless. The expectation was I was going to go to college, but they didn't give me any advice about where to go, how to think about it. I had no career aspirations. It's not like I wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer or something, and therefore I should try to think of going to a school that would have pre-law or pre-med or whatever. I knew I was going to go to college, and I wanted to, not be a burden on my parents.
What's interesting about that, though, is your dad specialized in working with young people.
I know.
And yet it didn't seem to be that detrimental to you. It could have been detrimental to you or a lot of people in that situation, but it's like, you think your dad would have been an expert in young people.
He was with other people's kids. And when he's with other people's kids, now he comes back home and he's thinking about other people's kids and how to reach them, and he's neglecting us.
Yeah.
I don't know that he ever really went to my baseball games. I was biking myself, or eventually, I could drive.
I guess he just thought like, hey, my kids are good. I don't need to worry about them.
I don't know. I don't remember them coming up after the game. I think one or two high school games they took some movies. They came up afterwards. It's almost like I was on my own.
Yeah, and for you, you didn't need that validation from them. Right. A lot of people do. A lot of people, like my wife and I were at the lake with the kids, and they're always like, hey, Dad, Mom, look at us. And it's like, my wife's like, is this normal for kids at this age? Like, when they're 2 and 3, it's like, yeah, hey, Dad. But when you're like 8, 9, 10, 11, they constantly want us to see and view what they're doing, which is fine. We don't. Obviously, we love them. It's just funny because she's like, I don't hear other kids asking their parents to constantly look at them. Part of it's they're homeschooled, right? So we just have a very close-knit family, right? We do everything together. We eat all our meals together. We're in our lives 99% of the time. And that's not normal in today's culture where a family is that close-knit.
Right.
So I guess it's just...
Yeah, I don't ever remember saying to my parents, come look at... I might have built a fort in the garage, and I wanted them to see the fort.
Yeah. Did you do things differently with your kids? Were you a little bit more involved than your parents?
Yeah. Should we?
We'll get to that.
We'll get to that. But
I'm just curious.
I was different.
Yeah.
I was different.
But you look back on that and never really saw it as a negative thing. You were just like, yeah.
Well, I think I built... The foundation was there. We didn't have trauma. We had, I wasn't hungry.
That met your basic needs as far as
my
survival.
Basic needs, and I knew I was loved. I never sensed that I wasn't loved.
And you
I was just free, and it developed a self-confidence.
You found family in all the things that you did. If you didn't have all those activities, then life probably would have been a little harder.
Yeah, and my brothers found each other.
Yeah.
And my sister, she struggled, and she struggles to this day.
Yeah.
And she's in her 70s.
Because like my senior year of high school, I was I was always the younger person, and I loved that. I loved being younger than everyone because to me, I felt like I get to get a head start in life. Because there was classmates of mine graduating at 19, almost 20, and you're like, what a waste of time. Like the first 17 years of your life, it's not a waste of time, but it's like the whole point is to get beyond that so you can actually go live life. And so these guys that are graduating at 19 and 20, I'm like, dude, I'm going to graduate. I'm 17. But they did a study. This is a little side tangent. They did a study. If you want to optimize your life for sports, then you actually want to withhold your child.
Right.
And you want them to be graduating when they're 19 or 20. That's if you're trying to optimize them for sports.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to optimize my kid for sports. I'm trying to optimize them for life. And so for me, sports is just, and we already talked about it, sports is just about moving your body because I want them to understand that like part of what I think is a functional human being is exercising. It's nice that you're good at something. It's nice that you enjoy the thing. And they do, but ultimately it's for the sake of moving your body.
Yeah, I think too often parents live out their life through their kids.
Yeah.
And so they hold them back. They have them focus on one sport. And I don't think that's wise.
Yeah.
I think you need variety. If that I had done that, I would have pursued baseball. And ended up, my eyes started going bad my senior year. And so I actually got hit in the head twice by fastballs because I couldn't see it coming. I mean, I got hit in the temple twice in practice.
It's not good.
I mean, it's like, and the helmets those days, they came to here. So, you know, when you go like this, the helmet falls off and then I get hit twice. Plus, you know, I was playing center field and I could barely see the ball. So my eyes are going bad. So I ended up going to the Air Force Academy, but I'm not going to be a pilot.
Yeah, let's talk about that now. So you did all 4 years there?
No. So I end up leaving after my first semester of school. When I went there, it's just a really strange place. You got 4,000 guys up in the mountains, no women, and it was just a really crude place. And the culture was denigrating to women. It was just foul. It just the curriculum was very narrow. So I did fine in basic training in the summer, and then I did well in school. I made the dean's list. I was on the football team. I ended up getting injured, separating my shoulder during football practice. So I was out for like 6 weeks, so I ended up not playing in any games. But my sense was, you know, you go in, you think you're going to be there for a career. And
This is after or before Vietnam War?
This is during the Vietnam War. So my draft number is 351. So I'm not going to be drafted. And the war is starting to kind of wind down a bit.
Yeah, because the guys I talked to who were in it were usually, they're like mid-70s at this point.
Yeah, so I graduated in 72. And I remember the bombing of North Vietnam in December. Nixon was bombing the crap out of it.
How long was that war? I should research that.
Well, it was probably a decade. It depends on when the Gulf of Tonkin might have been in 63. And
Like how long do you think we had troops out there for?
Probably 12 years.
Wow. I should do more research on that. I didn't realize we were out there. It was kind of like this Iraq war. We're out there for so long.
But it was big.
Yeah.
And I end up later studying it very closely. And I'll tell you why later. But I wasn't going to be drafted because, 351 is like, I'm not going to the military. But I decided to go. And actually, even though I didn't like the culture, it did really wonderful things for me. For one thing, it continued to reinforce this idea of perfection and being high quality and good. And when you are a freshman there's nothing you can do that's good. We did amazing things, and it was never good enough.
Right. Because I was in the military. I don't know if you know that. And so part of that is in war, there are no rules. And so if you're expecting to win a prize at the end, in war, it's like, no, you didn't die. That's your prize. So don't expect, because a lot, I went to basic training and I got a perfect score on my first test. And he went up there and wrote 299 instead of 300. And I felt injustice towards it. And looking back on it now, he's trying to teach me a lesson. Like, in war, no one cares about perfection. No one cares about the standard. It's, did you not die and did you help wasn't about me. So looking back, when you're going through it, you're like, man, this sucks. But then you're like, oh, okay, there was a reason for that because war sucks.
Well, and I went through basic training, but then I went into school.
Yeah,
so I wasn't going off to active duty.
Yeah.
So now I'm being trained to be an officer. And the way they train people is by putting a tremendous amount of pressure on you.
Right.
And they want to weed people out. And the whole year is like that. I mean, the whole year is like basic training.
Yeah.
And it's not like,
it's not fun.
It's miserable. And I decided after.
I'm surprised they let you out.
Well, here's the deal.
Or is it because of the injury?
Here's the deal. After my first quarter, I think it was after basic training, I decided, I don't think I'm going to make this a career.
Yeah.
Halfway through the first semester, I decided I'm going to get out after 2 years, because you can get out after 2 years and not have any commitment to the military. But once you start your third year, if you leave, you have to be an enlisted person. So I'm thinking I'm going to last for 2 years. I'll get free education, and then I'll transfer, and I won't have a commitment. After the first semester, I said, I can only make it through 1 year. I came back from, Christmas or whatever it was, the end of the first semester, and I'm going back in, now I'm in the second semester, and I'm thinking, it's not working for me. So the hardest decision I have ever made in my life was to leave, because there's so much pressure on you to stay, and it's so hard to get in. And if you leave, you're branded a quitter or a traitor, or you're not a patriot or whatever it is. But I realized I need to do what's good for me. I should ignore the voices that say you're a quitter, or you couldn't hack it, or whatever it is, because I was hacking it. I was like in the top 1% athletically. I mean, there was 1,500 kids or students in the freshman class, and I was number 15, from an athletic fitness point of view. So I'm in the top 1% of a school that's, taken the top, 5%. So I'm getting the dean's list. So academically, I'm hacking it. Physically, I can hack it. But I just didn't like the culture. And there's a verse in the Bible, in Proverbs, that says it's better to live in peace in an attic than to live with a crabby woman in luxury, something like that. And that's what it was. I mean, the facilities were top notch. The food was great. The teaching was decent. But I wasn't happy. And none of the upperclassmen were happy either. I mean, they were all putting up with it.
Right.
And so I thought, I don't want to spend 4 years of my life living that way. So I decided that I would transfer to Wheaton College, which is a really highly competitive Christian school outside of Chicago.
Not D1.
Not D1, it was D3. And I could play there, and I could play all the time. I was going to have to, they weren't allowing freshmen to play at D1 varsity anyway.
Right.
So I wasn't going to play that year, but I was there were like 12 wide receivers in the freshman class. So I'm a wide receiver. It's like, what are the odds of me making it? Well, by the time I had left, 9 of the 12 had left. They were going other places because they didn't want to put up with this kind of.
Yeah, so you had the
Setting.
option be a small fish in a big pond,
Yep.
or be a big fish in a little pond, and you had that opportunity.
Yeah. So I transferred to Wheaton. It's a really good Christian school. It's 15 miles from my house, outside of Chicago. And I enroll in the spring quarter. I don't know anybody. It's a private school. It's very different than Air Force, very different than the high school. Probably the facilities in my high school were better than what they were at the college. But the coaches had recruited me. They knew about me. When I ended up going there, they had just had a new coach come in from San Jose State. And so he was a Division I coach, and he actually had beaten Stanford when Plunkett was there. He had devised a different way of defending passes, wrote a book on it, and they ended up beating Stanford when Plunkett was there, and I think it was 71. Anyway, I go there, and I join the team, and I become a starter right away. And over the next 2 years or 3 years, I end up being all conference, setting all the records in football for receiving, pass yardage, per game, per season.
Yeah, if you take a
career, all
D1
that
player
stuff.
and play him in a D3, he should dominate.
You should. In the meantime, I had to choose a major. I had no direction. I had no ambition.
Did that bother you?
Well, it didn't bother me, but it's like when you first come in, you have to declare a major. And so they have a room full of all the departments. And it's like, no. It was like I picked psychology because it was the only thing that I wasn't like, I didn't want to read. I was a lousy reader, so I wasn't going to do English or literature. I wasn't going to do Bible or, Greek. I wasn't going to do the sciences. We had all kinds of requirements. We had to take 5 quarters of a science, 5 quarters of a foreign language. It was a killer. So I ended up taking, 3 classes of geology because I had taken other things at Air Force. I transferred in a whole bunch of credits, like 27 credits. It was like almost an entire year because of all the stuff I had done at Air Force. But I picked psychology. And eventually I ended up having a minor in education as well.
So let me ask you this. I mean, you may not know the answer, but how do I know you've traveled the world. How do other countries handle this point in young adults' life? Do they guide them better to a point where they're late teens, early 20s, so they have a better idea of what they want to do? Or is this a common issue with young adults with the thought of what should I do with my life?
I think there's 2 tracks. A lot of countries, you don't have to even go to school past, elementary school. Development countries like Germany or whatever, they end up kind of doing a 2-track early in high school. And so kind of there's an academic side and there's a vocational side. And so if you want to be a welder or an electrician or whatever that, you're going to go kind of the vocational route. Long ago when I was in school, vocational school was shop, and it was not seen as getting ready to go to college. And in Hinsdale, everybody was going to college. So I don't even think we had a shop class. We might have, but I never took it.
But they did, I guess, depending on what school you went to, but trades wasn't as frowned upon as it is today, I feel like, as far as teaching young people.
Well, I don't know. I mean,
Exposing it.
it's coming back.
It is. That's why
coming back.
I'm doing podcasts. I just did one with an HVAC guy because he's like,
Yeah.
dude, you will make six figures.
Yes.
You will learn a skill.
Yes.
You will provide value.
Yes.
A lot of these degrees you're getting right now in college, you can go work at Starbucks.
That's right. And so I think other countries have a better system, and part of it is the stigma of not college bound academic side.
Yeah.
Everybody needs a college or some kind of post-secondary education.
I'm all about learning.
Yeah.
You do need to
And
learn something, but it's in what state are you learning?
Exactly.
Like the HVAC guy, right?
Right.
Why is he able to have a successful business? Because he went and learned a skill and now is doing the skill.
Right.
So I'm all about learning for a purpose.
Yes.
But I think the thing we're getting wrong in America is we're teaching them dumb stuff, silly stuff that isn't really applicable to whatever you're going to learn. I have a college degree. I have 2 master's degrees. And it's like, they didn't really help me get a job because they're like, so does everyone and their mom have these same types of classes? How is this separating you from everyone else? It's like,
well,
I don't know.
It goes back to why are we in school?
Yeah.
And so if it's to learn a job or the skills for a job, what we are doing now doesn't make sense. But if it's to learn study skills, mental discipline, Wheaton College is a liberal arts school. Air Force was very narrow, and you were going to, an engineer or flying or physics, so it was heavy in the sciences. Wheaton is the opposite. So you have all these soft majors. One of the things that was great about Wheaton was that as a Christian school, we went to chapel 4 times a week and for half an hour. And we had the best preaching that you could have because Wheaton is known internationally as a really solid Christian school. And so a lot of people who were missionaries sent their kids to Wheaton. So our soccer team was great because, these were the kids who had grown up in South America or Africa. But it was understood that the BA or the bachelor's degree wasn't going to be enough. But you're learning about values. I'm taking classes in speech and in philosophy and in art and music, in the sciences, in literature, in Bible, in, military science. They had an ROTC program there, which was required for freshmen. Of course, when I came, I had already had all the military training at Air Force.
I'm good.
It's like, you don't have to take any more. And I saw these guys marching. I was like, these guys are really bad. I mean, this is during the Vietnam War, too. It's like, they don't even know how to march. But I did have to do that. And I think looking back on it, if I had wanted to do the military, I should have done ROTC, because then I could have gotten to school. I could have gone to Wheaton and had my school paid for. Plus, I could have, a job after I graduated.
Hindsight's always 20. Like after the fact, it's like, after I got out of the Army, it's like, I could have done things a little differently.
Yes. So,
when I was in the Army and I went to go start taking college courses in the Army, I went to the guy to help me. He's like, "Are you an idiot?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Based off your test scores, you should have gone to the Air Force." I was like, "Well, no one never told me that when I was signing up for the Army."
Yep.
Thanks for telling me now.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
had I known, I probably had I known, because back then they were like, Army people or Air Force people got paid more if they had to live on an Army base because the standards are so much lower. Like, here's a hazard pay because you have to go live on an Army base, and you're like, they don't tell you that when you're 18. Like, hey, here's these. Let me break it down for you. Here's these branches.
Yep.
This branch does this. This branch does this. If you want to have this kind of life, join that one. No one gives you that.
Well, the recruiters. I mean, if they're have these recruiters,
they're not.
Then you can. But we'll get more to that a little bit later, because I end up having a son who goes to the Marines.
Oh, interesting.
My great grandfather was a colonel at West Point and was in the military, and he's buried in Arlington Cemetery. One of my uncles was in the Marines during the Korean War. So there is a history of some military vocation there. But we'll get to that.
Yeah. So you go with
I finished-
psychology.
So I go to psychology, major in that, graduate magna cum laude, so 3.6 GPA in a very competitive school. Way better education than Air Force. In fact, we were on a quarter system, and what they had been on semester system, and what the professors did was they basically crammed all their semester class into a quarter.
Yeah.
So I'm getting like 50% more of an education than what I would have gotten at Air Force.
Right.
So way harder, way better. These are experts in their field, as opposed to, I mean, the English teacher I had at Air Force was, a captain in the Air Force, and it's like, he didn't have a PhD in whatever. So really good education. I decided that I would also have pursue my teaching degree. So after I graduated, the coach said I could have come back and played another year, a fourth year, because I hadn't played because of an injury.
You redshirted, yeah.
So I had another year of eligibility, but I was kind of like done with football.
Yeah.
I mean, I dropped I dropped a total of 4 passes in my career out of 200 receptions. And I was just, as I reflected on it, I was just kind of losing my concentration. So it's like, and the practices were not fun. And I was going to have to do a student teaching thing, like 15 miles away.
Life kicks in.
And it's like, I really, if I could have been cushy like the way the pros have it, I could have done it. But these practices were murder. I mean, we were going live all the time.
Well, back then they didn't understand, like the science today. They understand like this is what, 70s, 80s.
This is mid 70s.
Back then they didn't understand the science of. Back then it was work hard for the sake of working hard. Where today they actually understand like you don't actually have to work hard every day.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You can put effort in, but like even in like now, like with all the podcasts I learn about just exercise and running, and it's like, oh, if I could redo my 20s again, I would redo all my running, because I did a lot of zone 3 and 4 training, and they probably didn't even understand that back in the 70s as far as zone 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and it's like a lot of your training back then, because when I was running in middle school, there was this dad that I would run with, and
these are distance or sprints.
We would run probably 4 to 9 miles.
Okay, that's distance too.
Yeah, and
I run 40 yards.
Yeah.
In football, you run 40 yards.
Yeah. But when I would run with him, every run he had to kill himself, because that was just his mindset. And the training now says, if you want to do well, you don't have to kill yourself every time you go out there. You kill yourself once a week, and then all your other training is a lot less. So I'm sure back then it was like, if
it was one size fits all.
It was like, go kill yourself.
It was like,
and hopefully you don't get injured.
And high school was like that too. I mean, we would run at the end of practice after having, full go. The bad thing about being fast is when it comes at the end of practice and you're doing wind sprints, they expect you to win every time.
Yeah.
So I couldn't, I and another guy in high school and in college, I was the fastest. I had to be first every time. So I couldn't slack.
Yeah.
So if we did like 100, we did 10 100-yard dashes, I had to be first. And that is a stupid exercise.
Did your fitness continue after college? Was that still a part of your life? Exercising?
Exercising was.
Okay.
I ended up doing, I ended up coaching. So let's talk about after.
Finishing college.
Yeah, so I go back and I do a student teaching job, and I'm a graduate assistant on the football team. So rather than play, I'm now coaching. And mainly I'm scouting other teams. But I'm also giving advice to the wide receivers who had followed me and lived in my shadow because I was always playing. Ends up that the people who I coached who followed me broke my records, which, they saw me play for like 2 or 3 years and it's like, okay. And they got good.
Yeah, and that's kind of the point. You should be helping the next generation.
Yeah.
I want my kids to excel better than me. I don't want them to do the same as me, right? I want them to excel in every area because...
And there's that sense of wanting to do well, but not being so consumed by things that you lose perspective. There's a book called Range, which talks about the people who make a big difference in life are the ones who are generalists, not the specialists. It's a myth that you need to be good by spending 10,000 hours. Usually the people who have made a big difference have multiple careers, and I'm in my 10th career now, because they all kind of round you out and give you different perspectives and a different set of skills so that you can actually draw in them later in life. So now when I think back of all the things I've gone through, I'm now an author and a publisher, and I'm using all the skills of the first 9 careers in that role. And I never would have been able to do that if I didn't have those other experiences. There are so many unusual problems in the world that there's no precedent. And so you actually need to have really creative and insightful people who can kind of work together to figure out how to solve the problem. Well, that's kind of what I do. I've got all these different degrees. So I have a BA in psychology. I guess I need to jump through this faster, but after I got my teaching degree, I then substitute taught in the Chicago area for the next 6 months. And at that point, I'm thinking, I need a job.
What grade and level?
So
Or just
it was high school. It was all high school. And I thought, now what? I need a job. I have a teaching degree. I also have a BA in psychology. And so it's like, I'm wondering what to do next. And there was an advertisement in the Chicago Tribune that said they were recruiting teachers for a private school in Seoul, Korea. So it's like, okay, I'm applying for everything. Most of it is crappy psychology work, working in a mental institute or something like that. It's like, in order to be in psychology, you're going to have at least a master's degree. Right. And I didn't have one. So I applied for one job at a public high school, didn't get that job, and ends up the job in Korea, they want me to come. In the meantime, I had been studying in Europe for a little bit, so I lived in Europe some. But I go to Seoul, Korea in fall of 1977. Seoul Foreign School is probably
Are you single at this time still?
Yes.
Do you have a girlfriend?
Nope. Didn't.
Or did you have desires to get married at?
Nope.
No?
Nope. Didn't think about it. I had some girlfriends in high school, had some girlfriends in college, but nothing, marriage was the farthest thing from my mind. So I go to Seoul and end up teaching 5 different classes, junior high, high school, coaching 3 sports. So football, basketball, and tennis. And I taught psychology and sociology, and then kind of third world history.
Would you consider this your first career then, teaching?
Yes. Okay. Yes. So that's career number 1.
How long did you teach for?
And so I was there for 2 years. I also volunteered to be the youth pastor at the local church.
And did you pick up Korean when you were there?
No.
A little bit.
I could get around. But because it was basically an international school for foreigners. So the business community, the missionary community, the diplomatic corps.
Is that school still around?
Yeah, it's
What's the name of it?
Seoul Foreign School. It's probably one of the best schools in the whole world. It's become much more Korean. But at that time, in 77 to 79, it was mostly, white students. The American school was on the base, and so that was the military school. And we played them in sports, and we played the other military bases around the country in our little league.
I did a podcast with a guy, and he said something interesting, and he said, for any young person, if you want to have good perspective on life, there's a couple things you should accomplish by the time you're 25, and you've done them all. You went and got an education, you went and got a job, and you were traveled. And I'd say that's pretty decent advice if you want a healthy perspective, because you look at a lot of young people today and they've maybe done one of those things. But it's like, if you look at your life and you're 25 and you haven't done any of those things, and you're sad and you're depressed and you don't know anything and you're living in your mom's basement, it's like, well, there are some basic things you can do to get out of that. Learn something, get a job, and travel. Just those three things alone can kind of get you on a path where you don't need to sit with the therapist every hour, every day, every week, talking through all your emotions. It's like, no, just go do things.
Yeah.
Go live life. And then in the living of life, you'll find meaning.
My dad once told me an analogy about going someplace. It's like being in a boat with the motor on, and until you put it in gear and start to go someplace, you will just float and flounder. But once you go someplace, now you can be steered. So I think when I reflect on my background, having confidence and optimism and almost fearless, like nothing bad's going to happen to me. I don't live in fear at all. To this day, I know that I'm in God's hands, and what is there to fear? What is there to worry about? It always works out. And so I've not been afraid of risks. And so take the most unusual path.
As you became an adult, how was your relationship with your dad? Were you then able to dialogue more about life and your situation?
Yeah, he was the kind of guy who was used to being the boss and being the preacher and being the moral compass. But as I got older, I would challenge him on some of the things that he said. And he would never admit that he was wrong, because he's Dutch and he's stubborn. But I would see later that he would change a view or a position or a habit which I had said something about that, he had respected, and he thought, he's probably right. So, and he wasn't a touchy-feely guy, very rarely did he say, "I love you." He said, no one ever told me I love you in his family growing up. It was all, suck it up, keep your emotions inside, stick to it and just grit through it.
Yeah.
Those were the days of the Depression. And so, so I didn't feel neglected, but it's not like I had warm fuzzies with my dad. Some with my mom, more so with her. And of course, she's the wife that is taking care of the family, the traditional role. And she ends up doing incredible things herself. I mean, she ends up getting her bachelor's degree at age 44 after she put that aside to raise kids. She gets a 4.0, and she's teaching English all over the world, including starting a language school in Dhaka, Bangladesh.
So my parents went to that school because I knew I'd
She started it.
heard he'd, and they're like, we went to that school, and I was like, then how do you not know this person? Because they were there in 80 and 81.
Well, that's when they got there. They were there from 81 to 84.
Yeah, that's why I was like, you went to their school. How do you not know this family? It's very strange.
Well, this was teaching English to Bangladesh people.
Because did he also teach Bangla?
I don't know.
Because that's what
I
they
don't think
learned.
so. Why would they?
Well, they said they went to a language school.
Yeah, this was not learning Bangla. This was a language school that they started to teach.
Maybe it's a different organization. I have no idea, but
Well,
they said he'd. I was like, I don't know how many he'ds there'd be in Bangladesh.
yeah, health education, economic development.
Yeah.
And maybe they did. I don't know.
Yeah.
But my dad was like the top guy. So maybe they would just know the staff. And he was hired. After 30 years in young life, he had a falling out with his boss. His boss wanted to do some things or question some choices that he had made in terms of personnel.
So here's a question, and you actually made, because of your background, you probably give an educated answer. So normally in the business sector, if you look at people that are extremely successful, and even politics, you could say they're driven by certain things. Narcissism, that's become a pretty hot topic word now, as far as like what drives someone to be at the top. But then when you look at it in a faith position, it's like, what is driving that person to be successful? Is it narcissism? Is it self whatever? So I think some people do, but I guess the I don't even know if I know how to question it properly, but when you're in business, it's obvious to generate profit, to generate revenue. You want to be the number one to take out all the competitors, right? That's kind of how we understand capitalism. But in the faith world, I don't think you should be driven by those same things.
I totally agree.
So then how do you know the intention of that guy isn't to be number one for the sake of being number one?
Well, there's issues of projection in that. That's a psychological term, where we see in other people who we are. My dad was driven to further the kingdom of God. And there's different ways to do that. And he was trying to read broadly. So when we were in Chicago, he ended up knowing a whole bunch of senior executives in huge Fortune 500 companies. So he was rubbing shoulders. Again, that's, having that cheapest, poorest house in Hinsdale where you're surrounded with all the people who, if you're going to have to raise money for your salary, those are the people that you want. Mm. You convince them to support you. And he was my dad was in charge of, 4 states. And so he's going all around, but he's got a group of smart business people who are teaching him about leadership skills. And a lot of that is how to make decisions, how to hire the right people. And it's not about being number one. It's about providing a good service to people. And when you do that, you will be number one.
Would you say, in your experience, especially on the faith side, people are well-intentioned like your father? Or would you say that's not the norm?
I'd say I've seen both. I was in one country where I could tell that it's been more than one country. I mean, Korea was one, but there was another country also that's in a closed area. So, but the leaders of that Christian community were kind of arrogant.
And how do you, as a congregant...
And others were not. They were humble servants.
Yeah. How do you call that out like in business, you just know, like, yeah, that guy's driven by money. Okay, got it. And you kind of accept that. But in the faith world, it's like, hey, I think you have the wrong motivation there.
Well, I don't. So maybe we'll get to this, but I've spoken truth to power multiple times. And I've lost 2 careers because of it.
Yeah.
And so what I've learned is you need to have, I mean, you could speak truth to power like the prophets did in the Old Testament. And John the Baptist, didn't end well for him, but he was doing what God wanted him to do. He was speaking truth to power.
Are you aware of the organization Roar's report? It's a Christian organization that basically investigates primarily faith-based organizations, and she reports the scandals that happen. And it's really sad to see in the faith organization, because you're like, that shouldn't be happening in these organizations, but it's happening way too much, where you see the person in leadership manipulating other people, using them to their advantage, not sometimes for terrible things. And so it's like, man, that's so sad that happens. It shouldn't happen, but it does happen. That's a whole other conversation. I've just been thinking about that more because there's organizations that I've known of that have gone down that route, and it's really sad to see, because you have these men in power, and it's like, oh, well, they're backed by God, so therefore it's okay. And it's like, no, because no one should ever be at that level where we excuse their poor behavior, and it goes on for
it's issues decades. Of accountability. Some of the churches, these mega churches, are led by people who have elders that are trying to hold them accountable. And I would say that in the spiritual world, there are good forces and there are evil forces. And evil forces will do their darndest to take down leaders in the Christian world. And so it is not unusual to have all kinds of scandals among the clergy, whether it's the Catholic priests, or money issues or sexual issues. I can't tell you how many times I've heard about pastors who ended up having to leave because they were involved in, affairs.
Yeah, and the Roar's report, that's literally what most of their scandals are about. It's really sad to see.
I know about these things.
I mean, the Bible says they will know you by their love for each other. And you're like, well, if you're the world and you're looking at the church, and you don't see a whole lot of love.
They'll know you by your friends.
You don't see a lot of love happening.
I agree, but we're selective, because I can see a lot of love happening some places and it doesn't get the press.
It's true. All right, so let's, you finished your time in Korea?
So yes, and I decided I didn't date. Some people thought I was gay. One person approached me pretty graphically, and I was like, I had to make it really clear that this is not this is not my orientation. But it's a great 2 years, and talk about getting to know America, your own culture. You understand it when you go to another culture, and then you come back and you see
how
things with a different lens.
Yeah.
It's that fish that comes back to the lake and goes, what? I can't believe, and you all are like the fish. They don't even know what life is like outside. Well,
so here's a question for you. Experience is great. I recommend experiences. Can you, and this is essentially what I'm doing through this podcast, learn from other people's experiences enough where you don't have to get as many experiences personally? Because that's the point of wisdom.
You learn from your own experience, but you should learn from other people's experience as well.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of lessons learned. The textbooks are full of things about people's lives that you should be thinking about. Okay, that's don't do that, or you definitely want to go.
So here's my follow-up to that. What are some things, and maybe there's no hard answer, but what are some things you actually need to experience that you can't just read?
I think,
or can a lot of things just be like, just read it, man?
No, I think love. I think raising children. And we'll get to that one of these hours. And I'm trying to think, do I tell you now or do I tell you later? But I think people who are childless or decide not to have children really don't know what it's like unless they had kids of their own.
I had a little drama in the sauna because of that. Me and this dude were talking. We're both in our 30s. He has small kids. I have small kids. Mine are homeschooled. His are, I think, public school. So we were just talking about how that's going, and then some of the stuff that they're teaching in schools nowadays. And he's like, "Yeah, it's gotta watch out for that." And then there was this other dude standing there, not part of the conversation. He says something, and I look at him and I'm like, "Hey, do you have kids?" And he's like, "No." I was like, "Well, then I don't really." I could have said it more politely, but I basically said, like, I don't really care what you have to say in that matter. And he lost his mind. He flipped out. Again, we're in the sauna. You're already heated, literally. But he just did not like that. And I was like, I'm sorry, man. Like, unless you have a child, that's just one thing you... Yes, I'm an uncle. I had nephews and nieces, but it's very different when it's your own child.
Yeah.
Because you're ultimately responsible for how that child turns out.
Yeah.
And he just... Yeah, it's different when you're your own kid.
And having a child helps you learn about love.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a pain in the butt sometimes when you're changing their diaper or they're acting out or something, or they're making bad choices. But yet, you still love them. Now, eventually we'll get to this podcast where I'll tell you about my 3 adopted kids.
Yeah.
I didn't think it would be this long, but I have had an interesting life and a bunch of lessons, which I hope are helpful for folks.
So you
So I come back from Korea, and
now how old are you?
So now I'm 25.
And people think you're gay.
Well, that one guy did, but
you're giving off gay vibes.
Back then, you didn't really think about that, but I wasn't dating anybody over there, and there really wasn't much, to select from.
Yeah, especially if you don't know the language.
Yeah, so I was around in a English speaking environment, and I wasn't going to date any of the students. Yeah. I mean, there were some good. I could have dated some of them, but I wasn't going to. So I come back, and it's like, meanwhile, my parents had moved from the Chicago area to Portland, Oregon. So I come back to Portland. I don't know a soul. I have no network. I just have their network.
You don't have sports to simulate.
I don't have, now what? So because I had traveled in Asia between my first and second year, I had gone to China, Taiwan, Thailand. The China thing, we didn't have diplomatic relations with them. But there's a place in Hong Kong where you could actually slip into Red China through a special travel agent, where they would put a visa in your passport that they would take out when you're done. And so there was never any record of you being there. And I'm living in South Korea, which is, if I had a Red China, I would never have been able to go back into the country.
Yeah.
But I went in for 4 days.
Yeah.
And met the first refugee of my life in Canton, which is Guangzhou now, I think. And he had been a victim of the Vietnam War. This was 1978. And he's Chinese, and he's from Saigon, and Vietnam and China are at odds. And so there's some border skirmishes. And so basically the Chinese they wanted to get rid of him. So he basically walked from Saigon all the way up and became a refugee into China. And the Chinese took him, and they took him into Canton, and they didn't know what to do with him. And he said, and he came up to me at nighttime, and we started having this conversation because he spoke English. And he was telling me his story. It's like, man, I wish I could get you out, but I can't. And he was probably going to be sent to the rice paddies. And it's like, oh my goodness, what heartbreak. What a story he has. But it just, that kind of travel and having these experiences in different places just opens up your mind to other ways of thinking. So because I had had exposure to Asia, I come back to Portland, and my dad knows some people at his church that are looking for somebody to work with refugees. And because I had been kind of in the area, and I was young, and I was single, and I wasn't going to work for much, they decided to hire me. So I ended up becoming the first person to work outside of Krista at World Concern. World Concern was the organization, part of Krista, which is over in Shoreline now. And I was hired to resettle refugees from Southeast Asia in Oregon. So I had to tell people, mostly churches, about the need for sponsors, and then train them and then match them up with the right refugee family.
Since I met you at a gym, what was your fitness regimen back then, or do you not have one?
I was playing basketball on a church team. I was playing racquetball. I was pretty decent. I was pretty good.
Were you lifting weights?
No.
Because that wasn't really a big thing back then.
No.
Cardio and lifting weights wasn't a
was
thing
just,
culture did,
no,
unless you were sports
I
specific.
didn't have time. I mean, this new job was, I mean.
When did Americans start getting really overweight?
Well, I don't know. When they get comfortable.
But was it like in the 80s, 90s? Because there was a time frame where we really, because back then I don't think we didn't have to have all these exercise programs because people just weren't so overweight, right? If you didn't overeat and you played some sport, you should be fine.
Well, I think with the advent of the internet and cell phones and computer games, we've developed a whole generation of couch potatoes.
Because back then, right, late 70s, early 80s, how many overweight people were there?
I don't know.
Low percentage?
I don't remember. The only overweight people were poor and didn't have good eating nutrition skills, and they had no job, and so they just sat around.
Yeah.
So I haven't researched that topic, but my sense is that, and I wasn't running around in those circles.
Yeah.
I just knew that, I was consumed with this job and a calling to help others. And
did you help that guy make it?
No. No. But
do you ever know what ended up with him?
No. But there's thousands of people like him, and we never hear about them. And I end up resettling about 400 people from Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. The killing fields was going on with the Khmer Rouge, and just lots of results of the war. And April 30th, 1975, this is Day of the Shame. That was the year that, or the day that Vietnam fell to the communists. So I ended up studying a lot about the war, the end of the war, what was happening to create all these refugees coming out, the bombing in Laos with Kissinger and Nixon, all that stuff. I got to know it pretty well. There's some other things I'll tell you a little later about some career choices I had. But so now I'm into my second career reselling refugees. And after doing a really good job of speaking in churches and to church groups all over the state, I got about homes for about 400 of them. And then I then had the responsibility of making sure that they were well settled. And so I was following up with the families. And there's more to it in the study, and I guess I'll probably get to it in my memoirs. But eventually, they really thought highly of me, but they said, you need to get some experience in the refugee camps overseas. So my second year, they sent me to Malaysia. World Vision had been kicked out of Malaysia for faith evangelism reasons. And World Concern's executive director had met the head of the Malaysian Red Cross or Red Crescent Society and made a commitment to send people from World Concern to work in the camps.
Is World Concern still? I haven't heard of that organization.
Yeah,
I've heard of World Vision, but
World Concern is
it's a non-faith-based of World
no,
Vision.
it's part of Krista, which is a
Oh, it's still part of Krista.
and the main thing they were doing was sending people who had technical skills.
So why'd they kick Vision out but let Concern in?
Well, because we weren't there to evangelize. So I was in the initial group of 3 people who went over, and they were running the camps for the Vietnamese who had come out on boats. So, and my background was in education. So I was working in the transit center outside of Kuala Lumpur. And
Did you have a translator?
No, because they all wanted to speak English. And a lot of them spoke English, and the training was going to be in English. So we were basically training the Vietnamese who were going to English-speaking countries so that they would have some English skills once they arrived. So it's like, don't waste your time here sitting around, learn something. So we set up schools to train the refugees speaking in English.
So these refugees that you help settle in America, do they go on to have decent, successful American lives, I guess?
I mean, I did some follow-up with them. And they went into communities, mainly churches, that supported them. Some of them left because they got into the States and they had relatives elsewhere, California or Minnesota or whatever. But those are people who've pretty much assimilated into the culture, found a way to survive. They were happy. They didn't need to have fancy jobs. And so probably if you were to meet Vietnamese people who came to ask them, when did you come? And how did you leave? Where were you born? They all have really interesting stories if they were born in Vietnam and they came out on a boat. Some of them, in 75, it was during the evacuation, but others after the Vietnamese came in. Well, this is the next part of the story. So halfway through that experience, I fell in love with one of the other people who went with me over there. And she was on an island off the coast and I was in the capital. So I decided I needed to change my job so I could get out to be with her. So I ended up switching my position out of working in that refugee camp, and I joined the U.S. delegation that would go out to the camps and interview people who wanted to come to the
And who does she work for?
She was working for the UN and the Malaysian Red Crescent Society.
And she was your age?
She was a social worker.
She was your age?
She was, yeah. We all came over from Portland. So she was in charge of taking care of vulnerable groups. So unaccompanied orphans, unaccompanied minors, widows, victims of sexual assault, that kind of thing. So she was having that role. And we kind of hit it off during a Christmas break when she was in town. And so I ended up working for the U.S. delegation, where we would check the records of people who came in, who arrived, and try to figure out where their family was, in what country. So we would do these investigations.
How do you do that? Because those other countries don't keep very good records.
Well, that's a long story. The Red Cross actually keeps track of where people have gone, and they have a tracking system. And so we had 3x5 cards with people's names and relatives, and we were sending cable traffic, and
this is before.
So you asked them
technology.
Questions about, do you have relatives somewhere else? And oftentimes they would say, yes, they came out, 3 years ago and they're living in Detroit. So then we would contact the Red Cross folks saying, we have some people here, they're relatives.
What year is this?
This is 81.
This is before
81,
technology is a,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
it's all.
So no computers. It was all, cables and paper.
So how long did you date this girl?
So we ended up getting engaged over there. And we came back after that year. And I probably interviewed 10 or 15,000 refugees who wanted to come to the States. And we were preparing the case to present to the immigration folks so they could approve them for coming to the country. And there were State Department people there kind of checking things out. There were CIA people there involved in trying to figure out what's going on in Vietnam. It was a very interesting job.
Yeah.
And we come back, we get married in Portland, and we moved north to World Concerns headquarters in Seattle.
So let me ask you this in regards to marriage. When you got married, did you feel like you had the skills to be a good husband?
I think so. Yeah. I understood what love was. I hadn't thought about kids. But I was a kind person. I think my personality had been shaped with decades, or at least a decade, of Christian values and contemplation, and psychology degree, makes you do a lot of introspection about who you are, why you're that way, how do you avoid, injuring people.
So did you have those kind of conversations before you got married, like how to deal with conflict? And
we had some premarital counseling. My dad actually provided some of that because he was trained in marriage counseling.
He finally steps in that.
Yeah, my dad actually, when I think back, now that I'm a dad and I have kids and I'm thinking about what have I passed on to my kids, and I think about what did he pass on to me, probably the faith, and probably his brains and his sense of adventure and not living carefully.
Well, the reason I bring up certain topics like marriage, that's a pretty pivotal point in people's lives. And today it seems, I don't know if it's just always a thing in society, but right now they're highlighting just a lot of single people, a lot of failed marriages. And it's like, okay, where's the disconnect? Why are we having such an issue with young people finding each other? And then once they do find each other, it failing at a more than 50% rate.
Well, I think that's been happening a long time. We used to not have the internet, and so we couldn't connect with people we were a good match with. It's a little bit like buying a car. Back then, you saw a sign in the window that said for sale, and you thought, okay, I need a car. Maybe I should try that one. Now, when you sell a car, you put it on, Craigslist or whatever, and, people can search it, the color, the make, the model, the mileage, they can check has been an accident. So dating back then, you would go to, a bar or a church or a school or where you work, and that was kind of your universe.
Yeah.
Now you've got eHarmony and, Plenty of Fish and, Match and all these other dating sites, and some of them are more serious than others.
It's almost too many options that it becomes paralyzing.
It can be. And I will get to that later.
So how long were you married?
So 27 years. And my wife decided that she didn't want to live with me anymore after 27 years. She said she wasn't happy. She said we were different. And so we have an amicable divorce. She has not remarried, but I have.
So I don't know how much you want to get into it, but obviously that was a long time coming, probably.
It was, and I didn't realize it until I found some documents in the house that revealed that she had preferred other people. So I'll just leave it at that. And so she had actually lived with me for many years, and she really hadn't wanted to. Let me just fast forward through the whole thing of getting married. Eventually, we moved to Seattle. I worked for 3 years for World Concern doing refugee and relief operations all over the world. So whether it's, in Palestine, or
Would she travel with you?
no.
So that's causing some cracks or friction, maybe.
I don't know. I don't think so. I went to
Well, you don't think so.
Well, I went to Bangladesh again. When we came back, my parents had moved from Portland to Bangladesh. My dad had taken a job being the head of a Western relief agency.
Like when your dad traveled around, his wife always went with him.
Not always. Most of the time, not. Older, when they were moving someplace, they went together. But my dad was in charge of this consortium of Western Christian organizations like World Concern, but there were others like it who all banded together to create this Heed Bangladesh group.
Why did you choose Bangladesh of all the other countries?
Why? I actually got him the job because the head guy.
Because it was never for financial. Like when you talk to
No.
most people, it's, why'd you take this? Oh, I was going to get paid more. Why'd you do that? Because you're going to get paid
It
more.
wasn't, his reasoning was, let's go someplace and learn how most of the world lives and how much smarter we will be if we do something like that. We'll be able to relate to a whole nother set of people, but we'll also learn so much in the process. And they did.
What motivated him?
One, he needed a job because he spoke truth to his boss, and his boss said, well, you need to leave Young Life.
So after 30 years, they were willing to throw that away because of sad.
Right. Well, yeah.
Ego gets in the way too much.
Yeah, that's an interesting part of his memoir. And I think the person he had the conflict with is still living, so we have to be very careful.
Yeah.
But the head of World Concern had told me about this opening in Bangladesh. And I said, I know the guy who would be really good at that. And so I told my dad about it, and I told the other guy. They ended up connecting, and he has all that adventuresome, outside of the box thinking and relational skills, not with the family, but with everybody else.
That's so interesting.
That they flew him around the world, and he had interviews, and they ended up picking him, and he was there for 3 years, and he was the first missionary to turn the board over to the locals. Never been done before, probably hasn't been done since. And everybody told him he would fail because the Bengalis were too corrupt, and they would, take all the Western money.
Well, they are. They say they're in the top 3 of the most corrupt country in the world.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that one organization has to be that way. And if you want to be a Christian organization, you should have integrity.
Hopefully.
So he said the only way this is going to work is if it's owned by the locals. Otherwise, you're going to be dependent on foreign powers. So that is a huge sea change in terms of working cross-culturally.
So you would go over there and work.
So we went there on our way back to Portland because by that time they were there, we had gotten engaged, and we were over there. So they were in Bangladesh, and so we hopped up to see them. We spent. My mom and my fiance and I went to Calcutta for vacation.
Yes.
And my dad and my mom loved it because she wasn't in a Muslim country, so she wasn't always having to cover herself. She was in a Hindu a Hindu culture.
Do you ever go to Malamgat? Are you familiar with that term?
No.
So that's a Christian hospital that the organization my parents were part of. There's a hospital that they built up, and A lot of times people would go to Mallingat.
We visited a couple of Mother Teresa's places in Calcutta. Calcutta was probably the one place in the world I've been that I'd care never to go back. It was the monsoons. It was flooding. It took us 2.5 hours to drive, 5 miles in from the airport. The taxi kept failing. We picked up multiple people on the way, put people on the roof of the taxi.
That's why they got
It was
1.4 billion people there.
it was like the car kept stalling because we were going through flooded areas, and the guy, I ended up sitting in the front seat, and I ended up having this experience where the guy would come out and he'd set a fire to dry off his carburetors and wires and stuff, and then he would fix it, and then he would tell me to turn on the engine, and we'd go off. And this happened like 6 times on the way into town. We're going to the Fairlawn Hotel. I tell him we're going to the Fairlawn Hotel. He doesn't know what the Fairlawn Hotel is. I'm thinking we're going to be stuck in Calcutta in this flood, and it's like, what? And in the meantime, you're driving through the suburbs and seeing people begging on the street, and fires and smoke, and you think you're in hell. Literally. It's like, this is the place you drop the bomb and start again, because it was so bad. And we were there for 4 days, and I was never so happy to leave a place. And the wealth and the poverty is like, people begging on the streets that have been mutilated so that they can make more money.
We're kind of almost seeing that in Seattle now.
Well, anyway, so we come back, get married, move to Seattle. I'm traveling around the world, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Thailand, the Middle East a bit, responding to all these different situations.
And this is all part of Krista.
This is all part of Krista.
And what was your goal at that point?
My goal at that point was that I decided I wanted to go back to school and get a master's degree so that I could run a nonprofit.
Like an NGO?
An NGO, PBO, or just, not business. So I ended up enrolling in the Master's of Public Administration at the University of Washington. Little did I know that public administration means government. So I'm thinking, okay, so I'm not in business, but I'm in public administration, which is really about government service, which is kind of like nonprofits. Now they have a section on nonprofits. At that time, they didn't. So you were just being trained on government. So things like human resources and finance and, policy analysis and, things like that. All the things, but not business. It's more about how to write concisely for busy people as an analyst. So we had all kinds of really good professors and case studies, and I ended up getting my MPA, Masters of Public Administration. And while I'm there, I'm realizing I need to get a job. And I was laid off from World Concern, so I became the executive director of a Christian social service agency dealing with kids involved in street activity, downtown Seattle. It's where Ben Arroyo Hall is. Back then, this was 84 to 87, it was an entire block of kind of abandoned buildings. And so I was hired to be the executive director of New Horizons Ministries. And so it was...
How old are you at this point?
I'm 34.
And this is your 4th career?
Well, teaching, World Concern, overseas, back here, that's another one. This is now my 3rd career. Mm-hmm. So I'm working there, and I'm realizing, and it's a really hard job because you're working at night, you're working out on the streets, you're trying to identify kids who've run away from school, run away from home, who've probably been abused or been involved in drug activities, and they're on the street trying to figure out a way to survive. And our ministry was having volunteers be a presence there and understanding the street culture well enough so that we could identify the newbies and we could tell them about our services and we get them to come in and we hopefully get them off the street.
To then do what?
For them to, like, a lot of times.
You try to get them back to the family?
Not necessarily. I mean, it depends. You got to know them first in their situation. But
So if it's a bad family, then what?
Most of them were coming from bad families.
Okay.
Abuse. And once you get down there, the street culture with pimps and the whole sex trafficking stuff is really bad.
Because would you say, again, I wasn't around at that time. Is it worse now or is it worse then? Or did it get better and then it got bad again?
I think it's probably about the same. It goes underground, but to the trained eye, you can spot it. They've cleaned up Seattle quite a bit.
I mean, there's certain streets where you drive,
exactly.
You see them.
And you have places like, up on Aurora.
Yeah. You go buy Krispy Kreme, you'll get more than a donut.
Yeah, exactly. So we actually created a satellite office up on Aurora because it's a different clientele. And we needed to have people come if they wanted to get away from their pimp or, just change their lifestyle. They needed to have people that they knew they could trust. And that's what we did. We had all these volunteers that were on the streets at nighttime, go out two at a time. And we knew the pimps, we knew the girls, we knew the drug traffickers, we knew the lay of the land, and we never had any altercations with safety. And we were providing social services like, referrals for housing. We provided meals.
So they respected you. The criminals respected you.
Absolutely.
Because you weren't a cop. So let me ask you this, and maybe you've thought about this, maybe you haven't, I don't know. But in America right now, we're pushing a lot of socialist agendas on a federal level and now city level, state level. Based off your experience, should all these initiatives, should it be put on the government or should it be put on NGOs, nonprofits? Who's more effective in getting these issues handled and resolved?
I think they have to work together because the government has the resources, but the private agencies have the expertise and the relationships and the know-how.
Well, partly because they have a limited budget, so they have to be more effective.
Well, I mean, I've seen PVOs or NGOs that are crappy.
Correct.
And they last for years and years because they have a donor base that keeps them alive. And maybe they fill a certain niche. But this was a very unusual niche.
Does it still exist?
Yes, it does. In fact, I was there for 2.5 years, and I knew I had to move on, and I wasn't going to make this a long-term thing.
It was just too emotionally wearing?
Well, it wasn't me, I mean, I had done that kind of work, but it was exhausting. You're on a shoestring budget. Fabulous people, fabulous volunteers. Probably the most challenging job I've ever had.
So these type of volunteers, what is an archetype of this type of person? Someone that was in that lifestyle before?
No, and it's a Christian organization, so they needed to have a faith, but they also needed to have a heart for reaching people and understanding the culture before they said anything about their faith. So one of the principles of effective evangelism is having a relationship. Otherwise, people aren't going to listen to you. I've written about that in this book right here. There's a chapter on living in the world, and there's a section on evangelism and the principles of good evangelism. And so you have to have a relationship, and that allows you to build trust. And when the time comes and the person is interested and the opportunity is right,
it's time. To me, it sounds like it's time consuming, and there's no shortcuts.
It's time consuming.
In the natural, there's a supernatural where
Well, I mean,
Something
when
that-
Jesus speaks to the woman at the well
Yes.
in Samaria, that was very quick.
Yeah.
But there were certain things he did and her situation, insights into her situation that he had that made her, respect him right away.
Yeah.
But she was shocked that he was even talking to her.
So how do we, I mean, you've been exposed to that world for a long time. Homelessness, it's a big issue in Seattle right now, California, and people, all they see is we keep throwing billions of dollars into this issue and it doesn't seem to be getting better, if anything worse. So if resources weren't an issue and I said, hey, I want you to fix our homeless issue in Seattle, here's your budget of whatever, you have 4 years, go. What steps would you implement to be like, this is, if I have a budget isn't an issue, what steps would you take?
Well, it's way bigger than that. You're not going to solve it in 4 years, and you're probably not going to solve it in 400 years. Unless you have a totally different economy.
How can we minimize it?
Well,
I don't know the answer.
there's not much homelessness in Sweden or Denmark. And so they have a social safety net there that they fund. And it works, but it costs money. And you have to teach people how to fish rather than give them a fish. So it's ancient Chinese proverb. And so they need to be equipped. There's many different reasons why people are homeless. And so it's a very complicated topic. And so one approach isn't going to fit every situation. So you're going to have mentally ill people. You're going to have temporary homelessness due to job dislocations, or you've got people who are, running away from bad home lives. You've got drug addictions. You've got people who've lost their jobs and they have no place to go, so they're on the street. There are people who have committed crimes and who have to get out of town, and so they want to stay anonymous, and they travel to some other part of the country, and they can't be found. So there's lots of reasons why people are homeless, and so therefore you're going to need to have a multiple pronged strategy to deal with that.
What I hear you saying is it should be both nonprofit organizations working with the government.
I think a private-public partnership is the way to go.
Are they doing that now, or are they pretty separated?
Yeah. Well, a lot of what the government spends is channeling it through nonprofits.
Because I think some people...
But there are people who don't want to find a place.
Yeah.
So, and there are some people... I mean, we close mental institution for the homeless, and so we just dump them on the streets. Is that wise? Probably not. It doesn't help the people on the street, and it doesn't help, the ambiance of the street. Mm-hmm. But, certain people say, we shouldn't house them over here. So that's a whole nother, 4 or 5 podcasts on dealing with homelessness.
Yeah.
But I would say, in general, the nonprofits, because they are serving a group who cannot afford their services, they have to go someplace else to raise the funds. And people are not willing to give money. I mean, nonprofits tend to struggle because people are cheap. And this is one of my real big problems with the Christian world these days. They don't understand what the Bible says about money. And there's a chapter in this book about money, possessions, wealth, finances, and it's like, it will blow your mind and it will change your life. So if you want to just live comfortably the way you are, don't read it. But there are answers to what was going on way long time ago, even in the Old Testament. They had certain institutional structures that leveled the income disparities.
Well, Islam has that in a way. Alms.
Yeah. So, but like the year of Jubilee, all debts were
Was that every 50 years?
Every 50 years.
Organizations would not do that today.
Right, and you didn't charge interest on loans. Mm-hmm. And in a New Testament, they say Jesus says you should give and not expect anything back. And generosity is one of the signs of a of being a Christian. Forgiveness, generosity. So it's like,
So for let's say
our culture, we don't want to give money to somebody at the street corner because you're going to enable their habit.
correct.
There's nothing in the Bible that says that's a smart thing to do. You're supposed to give without expecting back and not really knowing where the money's going to go. So it's like, I rarely give money out, but every once in a while, I feel the call, I feel the Spirit move, and it's like, this person really does need some help. I wish there were better options. It's become a little bit of a racket where people are paid in jobs. You just stand out at the corner, and it becomes their corner, and don't you mess with them. So anyway, the short answer is, government has a means to raise revenue, which can then be channeled to the private sector. So our defense budget pays contractors like Boeing and others. They're private companies, they're for-profit companies, but they're getting the money from the government because that's an efficient way to get the money to accomplish
I think
government's needs.
what you're saying reminds me of the Gates Foundation, and it's like there's.
Well, I work there.
Oh, you now?
I did.
Oh,
That was
okay.
one of my careers.
Oh, interesting.
So I'm getting there.
So here's my thought is, and maybe they are being proactive in Seattle, but the Gates Foundation, aren't they headquartered in Seattle?
Yes.
And so they're
worked it.
giving all this money to Africa, but what about Seattle, where you're?
I'll tell you about that when I get to it
Okay.
in the story.
I have more questions about that now that I know you work there, but so let's go to fourth career.
So I get my master's degree from UW. I decide to leave New Horizons, the street ministry, and now I have to get a job. And so there's two jobs that really strike me as interesting. One is the CIA. One is the Government Accountability Office, which is the nonpartisan investigative part of Congress. So I apply for both. And I get pretty far in both of those processes.
That's random for those jobs.
Well,
What, did you watch a movie? You're like, that's what I want to do.
no. It again, it's like I see things in the paper. I see something on the wall. And the thing about GAO was on a bulletin board in the program, lounge. And I thought, that sounds really interesting. Mm-hmm. But I also saw something in the paper about CIA is recruiting people that they want to have them be program officers, which we would call spies, but they're really not spies, technically.
There's a guy, I was actually listening to his name is Andrew, I don't even know how to say his last name, but he's ex-Air Force, ex-CIA, and now he has a business teaching CIA principles to people. And I really enjoy him because when people can articulate what they believe, I like listening to that.
Yeah.
And so he lays out manipulation. I've learned a lot from him. He's like, when you are interacting with someone, they just have a formula to everything. And not that it's the best way or the only way, it's just they've laid out how to engage with someone.
Yeah. Well, so now I have another career decision to make. After I left college, it's like I end up in Seoul, Korea. I come back from Korea, have no contacts. I use, my dad's contact to do something totally abnormal. They'd send me off to Malaysia. I come back, I get married. I get laid off at World Concern for budget cuts. So I end up now working on the streets, downtown Seattle, in a nonprofit organization.
Yeah, you were almost on the streets, but you worked.
We were on the streets.
I'm joking, saying like you're not living on the streets.
Yeah, we had a drop-in center, which would blow your mind. It looked like something out of Star Wars. And it was home. It was safe. It was off the street. They could get warm. They could have a meal. They could hang out and play pool. I mean, we have 50, 60, 70 kids from age, 14 up to 21. I think we said you couldn't be there if you were over 21. And we had to make sure that the bad guys weren't coming in too. And there were murders at our doorstep, and somebody who comes and runs to our place and we're closed and they get killed. So anyway, so now I'm getting my master's. I have a degree. I have, it's like, now what? CIA.
Did your wife work during that time?
Yeah, she was working as a nurse.
So you always had that stability of income as well.
Yeah. And I was paid really pitiful wages.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was at World Concern, I made $19,000 and my office was in a closet.
But you enjoyed the work, I guess.
Well, yeah. And again, it's like, don't worry about the money. God will provide. Do what you're supposed to do. And I got you, God says. So I'm taking risks. I'm doing stuff that is fulfilling, has meaning, make a difference, trying to save the world. I'm still doing that, by the way. And when I went from $19,000 at World Concern, I made $18,000 at New Horizons. They were offering me 16. I said, make it 18. But guess what? I have to raise the money. So, do it. So eventually I was able to kind of help the organization get grounded legally and with grants and that kind of stuff. And the budget tripled in, 2.5 years. And I told myself, I will only leave when we find somebody who's better than me take my place. So eventually we found somebody who took my place. She lasted 20 years. Most people burn out in, 3 or 4. But she had the heart for that kind of work. She was doing that kind of work anyway. And she was really good. And so I left it in good hands. And now I have this decision to make. CIA, GAO, applying to both. The CIA experience was very interesting. I was meeting clandestinely. I was having clandestine phone calls, clandestine mail. I had a reading list. One of the things that I had during this, in a clandestine meeting in a downtown hotel with a CIA recruiter, he didn't give me his real name. But, we had a really good conversation because I had had a very interesting life and I lived all over the world. And he gave me a list of books to read. I had told him about a book I had read about the fall of Vietnam and the role of what the CIA was saying during that time. So we had a lot of interesting things in common and to talk about. And eventually, and that process took many months. But my wife was not happy about that because we would have had to lie about who we were, our names. We'd have a cover story. And it wasn't ringing true with her. So I went with GAO, which...
So you got the CIA offered you a job?
Yes. So...
Do you regret that?
No. Because eventually, when I took the work with GAO, that career lasted 11 years. And in that role, it's a long time investigate. For you. Yeah, a long time for me. But it was chopped up in different sections, which I'll tell you in a second. So it basically evaluates the executive branch on behalf of the Congress.
So now you're a federal employee.
So now I'm a federal employee. I'm the watchdog that's trying to find improved efficiencies or waste or advice on major policies.
And you're in your 40s at this point?
No, I'm 34.
34.
So I think
it's interesting because you don't have an accounting background. You'd think they would want someone
It's not an accounting there's an accounting side, but it's more about accountability. So it used to be called General Accounting Office. Now it's called Government Accountability.
I mean, they're losing billions all the time. They're like, yeah, we don't know where that billion went, and you're like, how do you lose $1 billion?
That's pocket change.
I know. Can you
And each
actually give that
agency
to
has
me?
their own inspector general, which is supposed to be looking into this stuff. But this is a separate, nonpartisan, outside, independent.
No one's ever
office.
fully independent, though. Unfortunately, people are always biased.
Well, I don't know. We had to investigate the issues. We had to.
So, what were some
collect the
interesting
data.
ones?
VA hospitals. So I had a job for several years looking at how veterans who had health insurance were going to the VA for service, but the VA wasn't collecting any of the insurance money. And it's like, they've got insurance. Why not bill the insurance? They weren't doing that at that time. So it's like, oh my goodness, there's all this money we're leaving on the table and go after it. So I and several other people studied the issue. There was a change in the law, and hospitals were then supposed to be collecting information on the private insurance that veterans had, and they were supposed to bill for the insurance and get reimbursed. That would reduce the amount of tax money that would be used for the VA. And so we went to a number of different sites, and there was one particular hospital that was really doing a good job. And so we went and studied what they did and how they did it, and how they
Was it
got
in
there.
this state or somewhere else?
It was another state,
So this job did require you to travel.
all over the states. So I was in West Virginia and Tennessee and Minneapolis.
Was your wife okay with you doing all this traveling?
Seemed to be.
I mean, when you're gone that much,
Well, I mean, I'd be gone for 2 weeks, but then I'd be back for 3 months.
yeah, but that's not a typical
So,
relationship.
and we had no kids.
Yeah.
So, and she was working. So, and I was bringing home the bacon.
How much are you getting
so-
paid then?
I think my starting salary was like $36,000, which was like
cool.
double.
Yeah.
It was like, I can finally go into the toilet and have it be clean, and I don't have to clean it myself. I mean, I was literally shoveling shit downtown at the New Horizons.
Yeah.
I mean, we would take stuff out to we would have this food that we would provide, and then we'd take the things out to the dumpster. But people, homeless people were taking dumps in our stairwell.
Yeah, I mean, they're still doing that.
So, so it's just part of the job. You just have a shovel down the back door, and, so I was literally shoveling shit. And it was really nice to have a job where, I had heat in the building, and somebody else was cleaning the toilets, and, it was like,
So this is
and making twice as much.
you'd have to go to downtown Seattle?
Yeah, so it was in the federal building. So I spent 3 years there, and then they had international offices. So they had an office in Frankfurt, Germany that would cover kind of Europe and Africa, Middle East. They had an office in Panama that took care of Latin America, and there was an office in Hawaii that took care of Asia. Well, I had lived in Asia. I applied for the Asia and the Germany office, but I really wanted the Germany office. Even though I had lived over there temporarily, I had lived, multiple years in Asia. And so I turned down the Hawaii job, and I got the job in Germany.
Yeah, most people would want Hawaii over Germany.
Well, yeah. I
So you moved to Germany?
So we moved to Germany for 5 years. So initially it was 2 years, and then you could go hurry up for another.
And your wife enjoyed living there?
Yes. And so I don't want to go too much into my wife's role, but meantime, we're trying to have kids, and we're trying. And so, since 85, so this is 90, we're moving to Germany. We still don't have kids, and we're thinking, this is.
Now you're approaching late 30s.
Yeah. So we're.
She's late 30s.
Yeah, it's like well, we're not going to have kids of our own. So we start going through a German adoption agency that places American dependents with American families, but through the German court system. And so we do the home study and all that kind of stuff. And I was traveling all over, mainly Eastern Europe at that time. The wall had come down in 90 or 89, 90. And so there was a gap of knowledge of what was going on over there. And Congress wanted us to provide assistance, but we wanted money to go to the right things in the right way. So, and there were certain sectors like the energy sector. The Eastern Europe was dependent on on Russia for their oil and gas. There was issues with the quality of the coal they were burning over there. So we looked closely at the energy sector. We also looked at the business environment. The Peace Corps started going in. We looked at Peace Corps operations over there. I was traveling in Russia all over the place. So Vladivostok and Sakhalin Island, all the way back to St. Petersburg and Moscow and other closed cities, which are now trying to develop.
So did you have a boss that would tell you go investigate this, or you're like, I want to investigate this today?
Oh no, these were like congressional requests
Okay.
to the GAO that got shaped in the form of a letter that says, we want you to, this is the problem. We want you to go and study and
Would you
answer
then,
these questions.
who would determine how much time you'd spend somewhere, how much money you would spend? Like,
Well,
who
that-
determined all that?
The higher level people who would figure out what jobs we were going to take,
Okay, so
how
you
long it
weren't,
was going to take. I wasn't. No, these.
you were
this
just going there
is
to
senior executive service.
crunch data.
So we design the job, and there's multiple layers of review, and it's all nonpartisan, and it has to be you have to please the Republicans and the Democrats and the House and the Senate, and so because it's such a politically fraught agency, but yet we have to serve everybody. We went overboard in making sure everything was factual, evidence-based, statistically sound, no errors. And so,
And this is before all the computing that we have today,
well, there's always
which is even more impressive.
yeah. So GAO we have a zero error policy. Every word in every report had to be checked multiple times.
Were any of the stuff you did considered like classified?
I had 4 top secret security clearances, but nothing that we issued ever was classified. I mean, I saw classified documents all the time. And when I was in Europe, we were in locked facilities with Marine guards, guarding us, and I was at the consulate, an unmarked consulate office.
Let's switch gears a little bit and actually talk about what was like living in Germany, what that environment, culture was like, enjoyable. Because you didn't live on a base like a lot of times. Correct. People live on bases.
I was close to the base. Mm-hmm. I was consulate provided housing. So there was a network of Americans living in this one area, which was close to the base. And because we were diplomats, we had access to the base. So I could get into the commissary and the PX. I had diplomatic license plates. So
people probably thought you were CIA. And you're like, no.
So here's the deal. There was a big contingency with the FAA because they were looking at air travel. Frankfurt was a major hub for airlines all over the world, Africa, Middle East. And so they had to make sure that things related to immigration and flights and all that kind of stuff. There was us, there was the consulate, and there was CIA had a huge contingency. So we were neighbors with CIA people. We played with them and against them, in basketball and softball, and we just knew who they were. They knew that we knew who they were, and we never talked about certain kinds of things. We would talk about places we've been. They would tell us where they've been and what, good restaurants or whatever it was, but they could never tell us in advance.
Right. So you did that, you were there for 5 years?
5 years.
And did you end up adopting a child when you were out there?
Yes. So we ended up adopting a 9-month-old child who was from a high school dependent of an Army major who was based in Stuttgart. So
the major's child.
Major's child is a 17-year-old girl who had an unwanted pregnancy. Surprise. Well, Anyway, I won't go into those details. But anyway, and it was an open adoption. They picked us from profiles. They were a Christian family who tried to raise the kid themselves and realized the mother wasn't going to do it. The grandparents were trying, but they weren't going. They're looking at, we got another 17 years with some other, and we don't even know who the father is, and the daughter didn't really even know who the father was. I mean, she had to wait to see what he looked like to figure out who the father was. So it's like, oh, okay, now I know the guy.
That, as a father with a daughter, that would probably be, I just hope I'm never in that situation. Where please have a child with someone that you love. Hopefully you're married.
Yeah.
And no issues. Because if you have a child outside of that, it's just messy. It's complicated. I'm not going to say it's right or wrong, but it's just complicated. It's hard enough having a child in a marriage, right? Having a child outside of a marriage.
So we take on this, and we actually had like a day to think about it. We came back from home leave. We went into the social worker's office. She says, okay, you've passed the last step. You're now available for kids. When are you ready? And we said, well, I've got some travel planned and we've got some other things and we don't have a crib. She says, you don't need a crib. I said, what? She says, you've been picked. This is on a Wednesday. No, this is a Tuesday. She says, you've been picked. Come back tomorrow and I'll tell you more. So we come back Wednesday, we see a picture of the kid, we hear the story. She says, so I need an answer tomorrow. So it's like, and we've been praying for a kid, And it's like, we can't have one of our own, so we're going to have somebody else's kid.
Yeah. Well, normally you have 9 months to mentally prepare.
Yeah. So we had a day. So we prayed about it. It's like, okay, this must be what God wants us to do. And so we called back on Thursday morning and said, yeah. They said, okay, come in tomorrow and pick up your kid. So the mother and the daughter and the child, 9 months old, drive up on Friday morning, and we met them at the social service office at 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning. We meet the family, we meet the kids.
So you meet the mom, the grandma, and the kid.
Yep. And then...
Were they crying?
No, they're holding it together. And then the mom, the teenager, and her mom, the grandma, leave the room and leave us with Aaron, is his name. Aaron Michaels, well, I'm not going to say it. Anyway, his name's Aaron. We kept his name. We had names figured out, but he already had a name, and he had a little duffel bag with his name on it. So it's like, okay, we're keeping the name Aaron. And then we added some other names to the rest of his background. So he's got 4 names.
Did he have any interaction with his birth mom after that? Or was she out of the picture?
Yes. So it's an open adoption. And so we agreed to let them see him and communicate with him if they wanted. And so we take him home, and he's got a little bit of what's going on here. We had some of his toys and his clothes.
He's 9 months?
He's 9 months, and a video that he would watch. Um, anyway, it was one of the best days of our life. We all of had a kid. Bingo! Don't have to do the pregnancy thing. You don't have to have me up in the middle of the night. We missed the first 9 months and all that stuff. Instant kid, 3 days.
The first time we had our first kid, I had been an uncle already at this point, but I remember driving home with the kid, and it's like, now what?
Well, so luckily my wife was a wonderful, she knew how to take care of kids. And so for the next,
Well, being a nurse, you're just generally more
yeah,
nurturing.
and she had babysat and, all that stuff. So we ended up raising him there, and my wife quit her job. She had been working for OBGYN German doctor and was trying to have, get pregnancy through him and, some of their techniques.
Hopefully he wasn't the donor.
No. But it ended up that didn't work. So we tried all kinds of things, but it didn't work.
I'm using the sauna a lot, and my wife's like, and we're not really trying, but she's like, if we are trying, you may have to stop using the sauna as much.
Yeah, and don't go into a hot tub because it'll kill all the sperm.
I was like, well, good thing we're not trying.
Yeah, that's right. So I continued to travel in Africa, the Middle East, Israel, Turkey, Russia. A lot of work in Russia. Some of the stands.
Was there any noticeable projects from that stand out to you? Things you investigated?
Well, one of the things that we did a study of the Peace Corps.
Did you ever see any blatant fraud?
There was some when we did an investigation of the World Food Program in Africa with refugees in Africa. So you've got in Ethiopia, you had the Somali refugees, and so food was being brought into Djibouti. So we flew down to Djibouti and we saw some corruption there. I mean, we were supposed to go and inspect, the food stocks. It was like, there's nothing here. It had all been stolen.
Yeah, I was listening to one podcaster, and he's like, the reason why Africa won't ever be, it could be successful, but the reason it's not is because the governments are so corrupt.
Well,
if they got out of their own way
Yeah.
to actually help the people,
that's human nature.
they could. Well, other countries have figured it out.
Yeah, well,
Like you've been to more countries than I have. I've been to a few, and I was talking to a guy in sauna. Sauna's like where I just meet all my interesting people. Met an illegal immigrant recently. We were talking about that, and then he ran away quickly because he's like, maybe this guy's gonna call the cops on me. And I was like, I'm not gonna do that. But this one particular conversation was with a guy from Russia, and he got it, and we both got it, and we're like, there is no perfect society, there is no perfect country, but at least in America, you can live a somewhat decent life. You can pursue things. You have. Is there fraud? Yes. Is there corruption? Yes. But not so much in the way where it will hinder your life. Once you get to a certain level of success, let's say multimillionaire, maybe billionaire, you're going to have a lot more government intervention. But you can live a pretty good life in America with minimal intervention from the outside. And he's like, that's why how many millions of people are trying to come to America versus how many millions of people are trying to go to Russia or any other country. And so we had just talked about how people in America who have never experienced life outside of America don't appreciate what they have.
True.
So then they poo-poo it and well, America sucks, America blah, blah, America this, America that. And it's like, please go to another country. Let me know how that works out.
Mm-hmm.
There's, we talked earlier about, is there some things in life you can just read in a book so you don't have to experience it? And one book that was pretty pivotal, again, I've lived in other countries. I've been to third world countries. I'm from a third world country. And I listened to Yeonmi Park. She's the immigrant, the refugee from North Korea. She's written two books now, and the first book just floored me when you realize like how poor the conditions are. I mean, she's getting at such a young age. She watched her mom get at a age, and she was, and you're just like, that shows you how the brutality of humankind can be
Yeah.
in North Korea.
Yeah.
And so she sees those things happening in America, and she's not gaslighting. She's not doing it for her own personal gain, but she's like, if you guys don't figure this stuff out, you're going to become like North Korea, right? With the propaganda, with the way you communicate with, it's just all the stuff. And so that book was very pivotal. I will never have to go to North Korea to know that, right? I was able to learn from her book and be like, yeah, this is bad. I mean, she would,
yeah, so you'll know that, but you won't really know it.
yeah. But I know it to the point where it's like, I don't want that.
Yeah. Well, it's like I talked to my wife.
I don't need
about
to
going
experience that.
India, and
Yeah.
it's like, you won't like it. And she sees it on a TV and it looks, pretty wild, but it's like, you can't feel the heat and you can't smell the smells.
Yeah.
And so, like, I know you won't like it, so we will go.
And that's a book. My kids are a little too young to read it, but I will have them read that. It'll definitely be part of the curriculum, probably in high school, so they at least understand and appreciate what it is they do have. Because imagine being a small child and your mom leaving you, and you and your sister have to go to a mountain to find food for weeks on end. Yeah. That's just minimal, right? Seeing death daily, and it's just so the lifestyle that she lived in North Korea. She's like, you guys couldn't even imagine that.
True. I mean, there are billions of people who live on $1 a day.
Yeah, and they're living on less. Like, everything is for the government. Every your whole purpose. I mean, they've been so brainwashed to think that their president is a god. It's just So that's a book that I think I wish everyone would read, especially in America, because then you can actually appreciate somewhat, at least a little bit more than what you have now. Because they all want the government to take care of everything. It's like, great, go to North Korea and they will do that for you.
Yeah, well, we're never going to have the government take care of everything.
Right, but that's what people are pushing for.
Well, I don't know. I disagree, but
I'm not saying I want that. I don't want that.
Well, the socialists I know don't want that either.
Yeah. So you adopt a kid. You're in Germany,
and we have to decide. So after 5 years, our term is up, and we have to decide. So where do we move from here? And we could either go back to DC, which is the normal career path for people like myself, who was a GS-14, which is like, pretty.
How high does GS go?
15, and then a senior executive service. So 15s are like the managers, and then there's the top level senior executives, which are, they're all way up there. They would be generals, and probably I would be
After 8 years, did you think you would? How long do you have to be in to pull a pension?
10.
So
I pull a pension now because I was in for 11.
Could you? So in the military, like when you retire, let's say you joined at 17, you get out at 37, you can pull a pension literally the day after. Is that the same way at the government, or do you have to wait until a certain age?
I think I had to be 65 or 66 or something.
But you do get a pension.
After 3 years in Seattle, 5 years in Germany, we returned to Seattle because this is where family was. My wife's family was here. We could have gone to DC, but it's like that would have been for me and my career. It was more important for my son and my wife to be close to family. So I gave up that career decision to come and give priority to my family. So I worked here again for 3 more years and did work extensively on K-12 education finance issues. So totally different, I've been looking at all kinds of different sectors, military stuff and international trade and economic development. You asked if there was any particular job that, was significant when we were in Germany. We looked at 15 different projects in Russia to look at what was working, what wasn't. And so we produced a report to Congress And of course, those reports have to all be checked. We had to collect hundreds of pages of documents and interviews and all kinds of other things, and write up the reports, and they all had to be cross-referenced back to evidence. And we were
Now
able
you can
to,
do it with ChatGPT.
maybe.
No, it's not that good.
How we doing?
We're doing fine. I always check and make sure it didn't accidentally just turn off, and then it's like,
Oh, that would be bad. So we looked at kind of lessons learned, what to do, what's working, what's not working, and gave that to Congress. And of course, you've got the busy people who they've got 5 minutes. So we write an executive summary or a brief. You've got their staff who want more of the details. And so they have chapters, and then there's these technical appendixes that provide all kinds of other stuff.
when I started working property management, I'd have to write emails to my boss. As a young employee in the company, I wasn't an employee, I was 1099, but as a young whatever in the company, you want to back everything up that you're doing. So I'd write these huge long emails to him, especially if there's some kind of escalation or some kind of drama. And then he would always respond with some question that was already answered in the email. And then I realized this dude's not reading my email. So then I learned short version, long version.
Yep.
And I would say short version,
Yep.
2 sentences,
Yep.
long version,
Yep.
20 sentences.
Yep.
And I did that for myself because I'm basically backing whatever situation I was in.
Yeah.
So then he would,
If he wants the detail, you
Yeah.
go down and you read it.
yeah.
Some people don't have that time or interest.
Yeah.
They're just going to trust you that what you said.
Well, you did
is
trust
right.
me. Then, yeah, that's why I get annoyed because he'd ask a question. I'm like, did you read the email? So, yeah. Executive summary versus.
So I wrote many reports that way, and I learned how to write that way there, where they trained us on a certain format in the way to write, but also in graduate school in my MPA. So
Are you pretty good at typing?
60 words a minute. It's good enough, but it's all about the revisions.
Right.
And so I have this sense of being perfect. So Air Force reinforced it, GAO reinforced it. In sports, you have to just do something and repeat it until you get it right. My dad used to have me do chores, and I would mow the front lawn, and he'd come out and he'd look at it and go, "You missed a little bit right there." And so I learned that you just have to do it right. So on and on and on. So excellence in school with grades or in teams that are winning championships, they put in the work to get a high quality product. So that's kind of ingrained in me. And so even to today, I guess I'm a little bit anal, but I have to know when perfection is needed and when you can just, A- is good enough.
It's interesting because in the tech world, perfection is an enemy. And in the tech world,
Ready, fire, aim.
it's release something that's good enough and we can always adjust.
Yep.
And that's very different than in the government, they want things perfect, but then that's.
But it has to do with the time it takes to do the job.
Right.
So like when the Romans built the road, from Rome down to, Pompeii or, Naples, you can't like just put it together and then fix it. It's
Right. With code, you can always just fix it.
Yeah. But so the bigger the project, the more you have to be planning ahead of time. And so when I hear engineers give a class there, it's always ready, aim, fire. It's ready, fire, aim these days in the tech world because you can fix it.
And a lot of times they release something knowing that's going to have issues. And then they're like, let's see if people figure it out or find it. And then
Well, I've started a new company with a website. And eventually we'll get to that. But
so
the website, we need to like start advertising and have people understand that there's this new company for publishing books, and we don't have to have the website perfect.
Yeah. Was that frustrating for you, or a
No.
learning curve, or you're just like, oh,
No, it's just like, I mean, it's got to be good enough, but we know that there's going to be gaps, and we need to get it out there, and there's still a few pieces missing.
so as a publishing company, because now you can self-publish on Amazon, right? And have you done that before?
No, this is my 10th career.
Okay.
We'll get to it.
Yeah, we'll get to the publishing part. So you finish up. What made you eventually get out of?
So I'm working. We come back to Seattle. I'm working for GAO. I'm doing school finance stuff. I'm doing major analysis of
And you're looking at billions,
hundreds of billions.
and it's like,
We're looking at all the states' school finance systems. So this isn't the federal. We're trying to figure out how to make the education system fair, and analyzing
on a state level. Why is the federal? So the federal is auditing the states.
No, but if you want to have a good education system, you need to study the pieces and see which ones are working. And one of the biggest problems is that in some states, they rely heavily on local taxes to fund schools.
Isn't that how it always works, or no?
Well, it's the proportion. So Illinois where I lived in Hinsdale outside of Chicago, most of the taxes came locally. Well, in a wealthy area, you can raise a lot of money. In a poor area, you can't. So therefore, the wealthy have really good schools, and the poor areas have really crappy schools because they can't. I mean, I did some volunteer work inner city Chicago. They had no footballs. They had one football, but they saved it for the game. We had like 20 footballs in Hinsdale. This is in high school. So, and it's the same frickin' system. So we studied, it's kind of an economic analysis of tax.
So how do you make it fair? Would you say, hey, you need to take some of your money and give it to them?
Well, you need what the solution is to have the state pick up the tab instead of the locals. So it's still a tax, but the state, it's now not based on the income of the local area. It's based on the.
Is that how it functions today, or is it still county by county?
In most states, it's much better. In fact, the lawsuit that took place in our state a few years ago, where the paramount duty for education is in the Constitution. So it got into issues of equity, and the state needed to pick up all of basic education. And then if you wanted to spend more on top of that, you could get it locally. So Washington ended up having one of the fairer systems, but other states, you go to Louisiana or Mississippi, and it's like, oh my goodness, it's the rich and the poor.
Yeah.
And it's a structural inequity.
How much, and again, these are questions I don't know the answer to, like, and I'm sure it's changed a little bit since you researched it, but like, how much percentage of funds are coming from the federal level versus state level?
Feds are about 8%.
So not that much.
No.
And how much are they dictating policies? Is it more for state level?
Very, very little.
So what's the what are they doing on the federal level?
Well, they do student loans. They provide extra funds for poor. It's called Title I.
Yeah.
So free and reduced price meals. That's the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So it's supplemental to support people who need it. That's really all the feds are doing. States have control over curriculum, the teaching contracts. We're getting a little bit ahead of myself, but eventually I'm going to get there because that's a career. So, so we're studying state school finance systems, K-12. And issuing a bunch of reports on that. Meanwhile, we're back in Seattle with this kid who's now 4 or 5 years old, and we're thinking, he needs a brother and sister. So, but we don't want to like adopt, and we can't have kids of our own. So how's that going to happen?
Kidnap.
So it's like, we'll pray about it. If God wants us to have another kid, fine, we will. But, you know, if God doesn't want us to have that, that's fine too. About 3 weeks later, we see a little blurb in our church bulletin. It says, 2 kids whose parents have AIDS need to have parents found for their, or parents need to find other parents to adopt these kids. And my wife and I looked at each other and thought, I wonder if we should like investigate. There was somebody to contact, somebody in the church who worked in social work. So I was like, well, you know, it's kind of like when I applied to Seoul Foreign School. You throw it out there and see what happens. Mm-hmm. So we contacted the person, and through it was another open adoption, but not through an agency. It was through a friend of the family. So we arranged a meeting where we went and met the kids, but they didn't know that we were like.
How old were these kids?
7 and 10.
Oh.
Brother, sister.
Caucasian?
Caucasian. Parents both had mental illness. They both had AIDS.
They didn't pass it on to the kids, thankfully.
My daughter, they found out that the mom had it when she went in for the wellness check with my daughter, with the girl. And they said, well, you've got the virus. And so this is like 87, 88 or so, back when that was like, you're going to die. Mm-hmm. And she said, nope, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to have the kid. It's like, okay. So because of the way the birth took place, she had the antibodies, but she didn't have the virus. And so she had the child, and she brought her up. But the mom had a second grade education level, probably an IQ of 80, manic depressive. Father had paranoid schizophrenia. He was also a drug user. So who knows how he was also sleeping around. So who knows how he got the virus. He passed it on to his wife. She has the kid. And so now she knows that she's going to die. The mom is going to die, and basically tells her kid, tells the daughter, sleep with me because I don't want to die alone. So she's raised in this kind of a family. They're both on SSI. There's drug issues. There's all kinds of abuse happening in the home. There's DSHS, really thick file on the family. The state's ready to take away the kids.
Surprised they hadn't done it already.
And we decided we will become foster parents. So we met them. The family picked us. We picked them. We said yes. Just a second. Expecting a call. And over a period of 2 years, we make the transition where they start spending more time with us. We become
it's different when they're that much older because they've already been ingrained with all these.
Right. There's a lot of bad genes, bad environment.
Yeah.
I mean, they were teaching the kids how to steal. It was just like in just a toxic environment and dangerous environment. And everything that could happen bad to a child happened. And it took us a while to figure out what was going on. But we felt like, we can't turn our backs on these kids now. Because it would have been easy for us to walk away and just say, we don't want this. But we went through with it, and we adopted them.
And they're now older than your other kid.
Yeah. So we went from, a 5-year-old to now 5, 7, and 10. The single one went, the one and only, to
You're in your early
23.
40s, or early 40s now.
Yeah. So so now we have a family of 3, and we're living in West Seattle. And the school system there, the youngest one is in the gifted program. I mean, he's correcting our grammar before he's 2. He's like a genius child. And my wife is talking to him all the time. And so he just picks up the language. Just really, really bright. He's in the gifted program in Seattle. We bring in the other 2 kids. They're like 3 grade levels behind. My daughter, who's in 3rd grade, she can't even read. She barely knows her letters because she's manipulated the adults, the teachers, to feel so sorry for her that they don't have high expectations for her to learn. And she could always say, my stomach's hurting on a test day, so they would let her walk around and she wouldn't take the test. So she got away with not learning through manipulating the adults, which is not good from a teacher point of view. You have to set high expectations as well as having a nurturing sense with the kids. So by the time she came to be with us, she couldn't read. The son had a number of issues.
He's the oldest.
He's the oldest. I'm not going to tell their story.
It's fine.
They're all 3 of them could have an HBO series written on them because of what they went through. The youngest is now in his 30s, and he's been in and out of prison. The genetics are really, really powerful. He's probably has inherited certain issues from his birth mom and dad, that we didn't know about, but they have a way of exerting themselves.
There's a recent person I discovered. I think I told you, Amanda Buys, and she talks about generational ties, curses, whatever, and I was adopted, and for me it worked out for my parents. I think they got to get into the deal. I got to get into the deal. So it was a win-win for us. But I do see a lot of adoptions that don't always. It can be really painful emotionally, physically, emotionally. It's just, yeah. Because I've had people who talk to me and be like, "Hey, I adopted my kid, and they're a total mess. What do I do?" And I'm like, "I don't know, man. That wasn't a struggle for me, especially if girls were adopted. It seemed to be harder for them. Oh, my parents didn't love me. I was like, that's not an issue I had. I never once thought about my birth parents not loving me because I just was like, I'm moving forward with my life. So I'm blessed, fortunate that I didn't have some of that trauma. Maybe it will rear up when I get older. I don't know. But, I am thankful for people that do adopt. As, thank you for adopting children that you didn't bear. I should probably tell my parents that more. But, it's definitely made an impact in my life because I could either, and eventually I haven't even done a podcast in my life yet, and I will at some point, but I could have had a lot of different options. Like supposedly my parents are Indian, but they ended up, I think they came from a wealthy family, and so they like basically hid her away during the pregnancy, and she went to another country to have me and then just dropped me off. So I could be part of some wealthy family in India.
Yeah.
Having a better life than I have now, which is crazy to think about. Or I could be stuck in a third world country in Bangladesh. And no one, my adopted parents could have never adopted me, and I could. So there's so many there's generational stuff there. And it's funny whenever I go somewhere, they're like, "Oh, tell us about your medical history." I was like, "Dude, I don't know."
Right.
So yeah, adoption is important. It is. There's risk to that, and it's not one I've researched much because it hasn't been an issue for me. But I know it can be an issue for both the child that's adopted and the parents. But I am curious, and I probably will do more research. How many of the adoptions end up successful, however you determine that, versus the adoptions that are really emotionally.
That's another issue like homelessness that you could have a whole book written about because there's so many variations.
Yeah.
And for us, I think knowing that this was meant to be and it was our calling allows us to just stick with it.
Yeah.
But it was really hard on my wife and I's
Yeah,
relationship.
you took that person from
And I was, and I coached their teams, their little league teams, their basketball teams. I spent a lot of time, taking them to karate and teams and stuff. So you
how are
asked
the
about-
older two doing now?
So the brother and sister, they're both in relationships, married, but it took many years for my daughter to find the right combination of medication to deal with all the things she inherited. And she still thinks deep down that because she didn't learn to read until she was, much later, and she had a mom who was not educated,
Right.
she still internalizes this thing that she's not smart. And it's like, are you kidding me? You came and you passed the 5th grade state test in 2 years. You caught up 6 years of life.
Yeah. One thing about kids, they're very resilient if we give them the opportunity to do that versus your victim.
And has had issues with drug addiction. Again, her story will probably be told and made into, a case study for miracles, because everything bad that happened to her has ended up being a blessing so that she can help other people who have those problems. You can't name anything that you've been through that she hasn't already experienced. So which makes her a fantastic social worker.
Yeah.
Whether it's, I'm not going to go into the details, but her whole book, there's
Is she local?
she's about ready to move to New York.
Well, if she wants, do a podcast with me.
Oh, well, she's going to write a book.
All right.
We're going to publish her book, her story. And she is the most incredible person I've ever met. Emotionally intelligent off the charts, because she had to live in this sick family and watch all kinds of stuff. And then a lot of things happened to her. And so her ability to empathize and understand the dynamics and her ability to articulate insights way better than me. And I have a psych degree, and she doesn't even have a
Yeah,
BA.
it's one thing doing the thing.
She's lived it all. I mean, she has the bipolar and the schizophrenia, plus other things, multiple things. But she's come through it. She's a remarkable person. And we could do a podcast on her, and it would take hours.
Yeah, if she wants to, let me know. And then the oldest son?
He is living in New York with his partner, who's going to be, they'll be married soon. They have 2 kids. He's got a permanent disability from the Marines. He was in Iraq and traumatized there. During the process of him leaving the military, they discovered that the 2 halves of his brain were never connected. It was probably a birth defect. So he's kind of a remarkable person that he graduated from college and went into the military.
Wow.
But he's always been a little odd. And so it's like, oh yeah, I can see that. And the youngest one, he's been in and out of prison a number of times, and he's still trying to find his way. And he's local.